Good evening. I would call to order the special meeting for the Village of Westmont Planning and Zoning Commission on this date, April 23rd, 2025. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Simpson?
Here.
Commissioner Lynn?
Here.
Commissioner Thomas?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson is here. Commissioner Donahue?
Here.
Chairperson Carmichael?
Here. Is that it? Mm-hmm. We have a quorum. Would everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And while you're standing, anyone who's going to testify tonight must be sworn in. So please raise your right hand and swear that any and all testimony you receive will be the complete truth. Thank you. Our first item would be to swear in and welcome back Tom Sharp to the board, who was on for a number of years and is helping us out right now. Tom, would you step forward here? Should I be here? I think the photographer's switch on. Please raise your right hand and say after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Illinois, the laws of DuPage County, the Westmont Village Code of Ordinances, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties for the office of Commissioner of the Board of Planning and Zoning. And now, Secretary, we have to have an additional roll call because the Constituted Zone Commission has changed.
Okay, Commissioner Lynn?
Sorry. Here. See?
Commissioner Thomas?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson's here. Commissioner Sharp?
Here.
Commissioner Donahue?
Here.
Commissioner Simpson?
Here.
And Chairperson Carmichael.
Here. Next item, to remind everyone, anyone who testifies must sign in, either sign-in sheet out in the hallway, there's another one at the podium. And we have an overflow room tonight, there's also a sign-in sheet there. Next item is the approval of the minutes of the February 12th, 2025 regular meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second, Thomas.
Okay, we have movement Simpson, second Thomas. All in favor? No.
Roll call.
Roll call for that.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson? Yes. Commissioner Sharp?
Abstain.
Okay, Commissioner Donahue?
Yes.
Commissioner Simpson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lynn?
Yes.
Chairperson Carmichael?
Yes. Okay, this is a special meeting of this commission, so I'd like to review our public hearing procedures, the way we want to conduct this meeting. First, I'll invite the petitioner to come forward, and in this case, the village is the petitioner. The village's consultant, Mr. Bishop, will begin by providing a broad overview of the proposed text amendment and its language. And then our staff will provide the commissioners with a summary of the staff report. They'll also elaborate on the requested changes, providing additional details as necessary. Following that, I'll open the meeting to a public comment period. This is an opportunity for anyone, everyone who wishes to speak and share your thoughts and provide input on the proposed language. Please be concise. I'd like to hold individuals to 5 minutes to speak at the podium. And if someone is representing a group or multiple people, 10 minutes, I think, is reasonable. If time permits, we can allow people to approach the podium a second time for an additional 5 minutes per person. So, of course, we'll want to have one person at the microphone at a time. So if you wish to speak, we ask that you state your name and your address before speaking, and please verify that you have signed in beforehand in the hallway or at the podium. And we ask that you provide all your comments and your questions before staff and petitioners respond, so as to reduce time needed at the podium. And this is difficult to say, but if I feel that one of you is asking a question that I question, or I'm not sure of the relevance of that question to this discussion, I'll turn to our village attorney, Mr. Zemanak, for his legal opinion. Okay, sir?
Yep.
Good. So if we get through the public comment period, and we come then to the commissioners, we'll then deliberate and discuss these changes. During this discussion, we will take into account all the comments that we heard by the public and then weigh them as we see fit. And please, we welcome you to sit and listen to our discussions as they, we hope that they will ultimately provide staff with direction on this large ordinance change. And lastly, I want to note that due to the scope of the proposed changes and the information provided, it's very possible that this case, that we won't finish with this tonight, and we'll be continuing to a future date. This continuation would, of course, allow time to make adjustments and gather further input as required. I'll be watching the clock and make a determination on whether to keep going or adjourn, but we'll be aiming, if we're not finished by 9 o'clock tonight, I'll be leaning toward a continuation to another certain date. Okay, thanks for everyone's presence. That's our review. Under old business, we have none. So under new business, we have public hearing PZC 001-2025. Requests from the Village of Westmont regarding zoning ordinance text amendments as follows. Zoning ordinance text amendments to repeal Appendix A, zoning, of the Westmont Code of Ordinances, and to establish new Chapter 95, zoning, of the Westmont Code of Ordinance, with comprehensive updates to the entire zoning ordinance, including amendments to the zoning districts, development standards, planning processes, and other zoning regulations. Duncan Associates, Mr. Bishop, you're on.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Kirk Bishop with Duncan Associates in Chicago, Illinois. Happy to be here tonight. As the agenda suggests, I will be outlining in sometimes detailed but often broad terms the proposed changes in this comprehensive text amendment to the village's existing zoning ordinance. Just a little bit of background, because I know that not all of us have been along for the entire journey, just to describe how we got to tonight. Remind us all that it's been approximately 45 years since the last comprehensive overhaul of the village zoning ordinance. A few years ago, when the village updated its comprehensive plan, one of the first and priority recommendations of that plan was to review and update the zoning ordinance. So that was in part the impetus for that. And of course, over the course of 45 years, there have been a lot of changes. I know the village's zoning ordinance is amended in a strategic fashion from time to time as issues arrive, but this comprehensive update provided us an opportunity to step back and approach the update more holistically. We start with the foundation of the village's existing zoning ordinance. So I know for some of us, when we see the packet and the new ordinance, it may seem a bit daunting, but many of the provisions in here, despite the numerous changes that are proposed that I'll be going over tonight, many of the existing foundational elements of the existing zoning ordinance are retained in this update. When we were retained approximately 2 years ago to begin this process, the request for proposals that we responded to set forth a number of general objectives for the ordinance update, that it be more closely aligned and consistent with plans and policies of the village that have emerged over the years, that it be modern, user-friendly, well-organized, easy to navigate and understand for staff, for commissioners, and for the general public. And that to the extent possible, that it be resident and business friendly and supportive of the village's goals for overall economic development and investment opportunities in the village. And of course, whenever undertaking a project like this that involves local laws and policies, we need to make sure, of course, that it's consistent with other provisions of the village code and with the state statutory framework for zoning. As I say, the process began about 2 years ago with a series of activities for us to learn about the village, review the comprehensive plan, talk to various individuals, staff members, architects, engineers, those who work with the zoning ordinance on a regular basis to identify need for changes and issues that have arisen over the years. That early reconnaissance work culminated in an initial project directions report. If you were with us a couple of years ago, you'll remember that I was here to present the general outlines for the approach to the update as part of that overall project directions report. After completing that work in late summer of 2023, we set out as a consultant team to prepare an initial staff review draft of the ordinance, completed that in the spring of last year, and have been working with your staff since that time to refine that initial draft, make improvements, and continue to address issues and needs of the village. That work culminated in the draft document that's available now for public review and for the commissioner's review, and on which we're beginning the hearing process tonight. So as I say, the overall organization of the document has been updated in a way that we hope provides a sort of durable framework for future amendments to the ordinance, and that is organized in a way that makes information easy to find and understandable once we find the provisions that we're interested in learning more about. We have groupings of articles within the overall Chapter 95, the proposed Chapter 95. We've grouped all of the zoning district regulations together in a grouping of articles at the beginning of the ordinance, provisions addressing the types of land uses, both principal and accessory, that are allowed, series of generally applicable regulations that aren't necessarily tied to specific zoning districts but apply sort of village-wide, things like parking, landscaping, and those sorts of provisions. A series of articles dealing with administrative and procedural provisions, how various zoning approvals are obtained, and then at the end of the ordinance, as with any kind of reference document, definitions of key terms used throughout the ordinance, sort of round out the organizational framework. So in addition to the complete reorganization, you'll find that the new ordinance uses many more graphics and illustrations to help explain key regulatory concepts within the document. presenting information in tables that allows for kind of easy comparison of which regulations apply in which settings, make it a little bit easier for folks to use and understand. Updated the page layout to be kind of user-friendly for a reference document like this. And as we'll be going over in the coming slides, a series of specific revisions to existing provisions, new concepts that are being added, and adjustments to existing regulations. Throughout the draft document, you'll see either as underline or strike through or footnotes, indications that allow folks who are reviewing the document to understand what the key changes are. So we'll begin the tour at the beginning in Article 1. Article 1, not much to speak of there in terms of substantive import. Provisions I like to refer to as kind of legal boilerplate provisions, establishing the title, the effective date, and just clearing up a number of kind of interpretive issues. We make clear in Article 1 in what we call the transitional provisions of Section 1.13 that the adoption of this zoning ordinance doesn't necessarily upend any projects that are in process, in review at the time of the adoption. Applicants will have the option, if a project is in process being reviewed now, either at the commission level, at the staff level, Board of Trustees, that applicants will have the option of continuing if they were in process under the terms of the old ordinance, or elect to have their projects reviewed under the provisions of the new ordinance. So no rugs are pulled out from anybody who's made, investment-backed decisions or submitted applications under this ordinance will not have a negative impact on any projects in process. Article 2 begins our series of zoning district-related articles. First, I'll emphasize that the existing residential, or R districts, as I sometimes refer to them, are being retained. Nobody who has residential zoning will have their zoning changed as a result of this update. There are a series of minor adjustments to, what I consider to be minor adjustments to the key. I think your existing ordinance refers to them as bulk regulations. I refer to them as lot and building regulations. For example, a new minimum lot depth standard has been added to the zoning ordinance. This is really new for the zoning ordinance, but not new for the village. It's a provision in the existing land development code provisions regarding the minimum lot width in residential zones of 125 feet. So again, not a substantive change, but bringing it into the ordinance just makes it clearer for folks that standard exists. Reduced minimum lot width for detached houses in some of the existing zones, R3, R4, and R5, being reduced from a 60-foot minimum lot width to a 50-foot minimum lot width, which captures really more of the village and will eliminate the non-conforming situations for some smaller lots in the village. And by doing that, probably could reduce the number of variances that might need to be requested in the future. Similarly, minimum side setbacks have been slightly reduced from 6 feet. This is an interior side yard setback. The minimum under today's ordinance in R3 is 6 foot. That's being revised to 5 feet, which makes it consistent with other provisions in the village code regarding easements and so forth that exist on the side of lots. A proposed elimination of what in zoning speak is known as a floor area ratio, a maximum floor to area ratio. This is a control that theoretically controls the bulk and scale of a principal building on a lot in relation to the size of the lot. Because of the existing provisions regarding setbacks, lot coverage, building height, we have determined that the floor area ratio is really not serving a great purpose and is an unnecessary regulation in the ordinance, and that nothing will be lost in terms of control over building scale within neighborhoods by eliminating that maximum FAR, as we refer to it. And then finally, I'll note that the allowed size or height of an accessory building like a garage or shed has been slightly increased in the ordinance. Again, being mindful of requests that have come in over the years and things that have sometimes necessitated variances, we've increased the maximum accessory building height from 15 feet to 18 feet. And I'll probably hit on that a little later as I talk more specifically about accessory buildings. Moving on to the business and employment districts. These are the non-downtown business, commercial, manufacturing zones within the village. Again, outside of downtown, the existing B1 district, which applies to downtown, has been placed in the next article of the ordinance. So I'm referring to all the non-downtown districts when I talk about the business and employment districts. The adjustments there include a increased minimum front yard or street setback in the B2 and C1 zones. The existing ordinance requires a minimum front street setback of 10 feet. It's being revised, increased to 20 feet, which will allow for increased landscaping in the front yard and related to that, there are provisions in your existing ordinance that establish a list of streets within the village that have a special street or front yard setback requirement, generally of about 30 feet. Those supplemental setback provisions are proposed to be eliminated, and increasing the B2 and C1 street setback from 10 to 20 feet helps to sort of make up for the fact that we'll not have those supplemental setbacks in the future. And as with the residential zones, we're proposing the elimination of the Florida area ratio requirement in the business and employment districts. An entirely new article proposed in the new zoning ordinance pertains to the downtown area, the area we're sitting in right now. And here we're proposing 3 specific downtown districts, B1A, B1, and R7. Now, I said that in the residential zones and in the commercial and manufacturing, business and employment zones, nobody's zoning is being changed. The same is true downtown, but we're creating some new districts that will be available for possible future rezonings within the downtown. And the reason we've proposed these new zoning tools for the downtown, we've taken our guide from the Westmont design guidelines that were prepared a number of years ago, where that design guidelines document recommended that the village's downtown be kind of thought of as 2 parts or multiple parts. The key Main Street area, just to our east here, along Cass, and then the edges of the downtown, and that different regulations may be appropriate based on whether one is right in the core area around the train station area, or whether it's in the outlying northern and southern portions of Cass. A residential zone is also proposed that would be available again for future rezonings. No rezonings as part of this project, but if this ordinance is adopted, the staff will likely be coming forward in the coming months to suggest ways in which these new districts might be applied in the downtown, and there'd be a public hearing and notice process for that as well. So no rezonings right now, but new zoning tools that will be available in the future. These new downtown districts really take their lead both from that downtown design guidelines document that I referred to, Also, the positive characteristics that we see when we walk about downtown, trying to maintain the character, maintain and enhance the existing vibrant, kind of walkable, mixed-use character of the downtown. By establishing new downtown-specific zoning districts, we'll be able to establish more objective controls on building height and scale and placement within the downtown area that help to maintain that walkable, mixed-use environment. One key change when it comes to the downtown districts is the proposed elimination of what the existing ordinance refers to as the development permit requirement that applies specifically within the B1 district today. Under the existing ordinance, a so-called development permit is required for any new construction or change of use or building modification within the downtown, regardless of whether a use is permitted as of right, subject to special use approval, or through the planned unit development process. All projects within the B1 district need to come before boards and the Board of Trustees for approval of a development permit. Given the scrutiny that projects will receive through site plan review and other zoning reviews, we felt that the development permit had kind of served its purpose and constituted a unnecessary sort of hurdle for projects, an unnecessary step in the process. We're proposing elimination of that. But we don't think the village loses any control or be sacrificing anything in terms of reviewing for character of buildings within the downtown by eliminating that requirement, which is one less stop on the road to project approval. The downtown districts are organized a bit differently than some of the other districts. They're organized around a series of really three key building types. What we call storefront buildings, which are the traditional Main Street storefronts, a lot of glass along the sidewalk that kind of engages the pedestrian and allows for display of merchandise and the like. That's a storefront building. A general building, which could take the form of an all-office building, less of a storefront kind of appearance and more of an office type appearance, or even an all-residential building that doesn't necessarily have storefront glass along the sidewalk and the like. And then the third building type is the row building, which, as the name suggests, is kind of, think of a row house or townhouse style development or building type. So the regulations are presented and organized around those three building types, different regulations for the three types in recognition of the fact that those building types will appear or we find them in different areas. Core area being the main storefront building, the periphery of downtown being where general buildings and storefront buildings might be allowed. And going forward in the future, if rezoning does occur, these row house or row buildings would be allowed along Burlington and Quincy, generally to the west, is kind of how we're thinking about it in concept today. So the way these regulations are presented in the downtown districts, each building type has a series of pages with diagrams explaining what the intended character of those building types is. I have an example on the slide here using the storefront building, images showing generally what a storefront building is, and then a series of 2 or 3 pages following those images that lay out the regulations that apply to storefront buildings, whether they're located in the B1 zone or the edge zones going forward. There is a proposed change in terms of maximum building height that I'll draw your attention to. The B1A has an existing maximum height limit of 40 feet. as proposed in the new ordinance, the new height limit would be 5 stories, providing a little more flexibility when new construction occurs for different floor-to-floor heights, which are common in storefront buildings, as we need a more spacious floor-to-floor height for that ground floor, kind of commercial Main Street storefront building. And in the B1 zone, the height limit would go from the existing 40 feet, again, to 3 or 3.5 stories, depending on whether it's a storefront building or a general building. Following the downtown districts, we round out the districts portion of the new ordinance with a series of what we're referring to as special purpose zoning districts. First, a proposed new district that would be available for future rezonings. Again, wouldn't be applied as part of this particular process, but by adopting this ordinance, you'd have a new tool for a zone that's tailored more specifically to public and institutional type uses like schools, churches, parks, government uses. Those types of uses now exist within the various zones, which obviously, as we think about residential zones, are really written with an eye towards residential development. When we try and accommodate public, civic, and institutional uses within that zone, sometimes there's a disconnect between the standards that might apply to commercial or residential versus what's appropriate for those civic and institutional uses. I think that it'll also provide, once any future rezoning occurs to the public and institutional zoning zone district, it will provide a clearer indication on the zoning map, and will be a little more transparent for people when they look at the zoning map and see, oh, I see this parcel is zoned for public and institutional use, as opposed to being a public and institutional use within an existing residential or commercial type zone. So again, no rezonings right now to that district, but a new tool that will be available should the village wish to rezone properties to that zoning classification to be more accommodating for public and civic use types like I say, parks and schools and the like. Also, as part of the special purpose zoning districts, a new planned unit development district. This is a proposed replacement of the village's existing PD, or planned development district. Slight name change. The new PUD zone is similar to the existing PD zone, but is probably a more flexible zoning tool for projects that demand sort of special consideration because they simply don't fit within the standard zoning district framework. So much as you've used the PD process in the past, the PUD process would be the proposed replacement for that. It involves a multi-step process culminating in the approval of a special use, but a couple more steps than the traditional special use process. And as I say, is more flexible than the existing PD overlay. The PD overlay, because planned developments do exist and have been approved in the village in the past, will be retained so that those projects will lose no rights. They'll continue to exist under the approval that was granted as part of the planned development approval, but no new PDs will be approved. It's kind of what I call a legacy or obsolete zoning district. But again, in order to retain the rights for existing PDs, we've retained that district and just made it clear that any future rezonings to a PD type situation would require the planned unit development approval. And then finally, the existing B3, I think it's called the resort zoning district, it's applied very specifically in the village. That district will be retained. Any future expansions of that B3 zone or any new requests to establish the B3 type zoning would essentially follow the planned unit development approval process that I'll get into in a bit more detail as we talk about the procedural aspects in just a moment. So that concludes the district portion of the ordinance. I'm now in the middle of the ordinance where we lay out the regulations that apply to uses that tell us one of the key things we want to know when we think about zoning is where are various uses allowed and what are the regulations that apply to them. So Article 6 contains a master table of allowed land uses with all of the zoning district arrayed across the top, all of the proposed use types along the side in the rows of the ordinance. One of the key changes to the principal use regulations is the reliance on a more generalized, modernized use classification system that kind of transitions from the ordinance today, which often relies on very specific labels of business types or activity types. Older ordinances that use that system often run into issues when changes in business patterns occur, new uses and business types develop, and it's sometimes difficult to slot in or determine where this new type of use might be allowed because it simply doesn't fit a use classification system that was developed 40, 45, 50 years ago. So I think we've referred to these as broader kind of generalized buckets of use categories, use classifications, a series of use categories and subcategories, and it'll make it easier and to respond to changes in business cycles and new uses over time. All of these use classifications and subcategories are defined in the pages that follow that 3 or 4 page use table that starts out Article 6, the Principal Use Regulations chapter. And following that table, again, all of the use types listed in the table are described so that there's greater certainty about where those types of uses are allowed. As I said, there's really 6 key groupings of uses, standard kind of thinking residential, commercial, warehouse, industrial, public and institutional, and then a series of what we call other uses that are kind of highly specialized. Following the principal use regulations, which is obviously key, we have the accessory and temporary use provisions. These are provisions that really, despite the sort of, when a new project comes in and we review it, that's a very important part of what zoning is all about. But on a day-to-day basis, as residents and business owners, many of the questions that arise about how zoning affects my property and what I can do pertain to accessory and temporary uses. Not the most glamorous topic, but things that are very important to the day-to-day operation of the village, kinds of questions that staff gets, and the kind of questions that property owners in the village will have throughout the lifespan of their time in the village. I've highlighted on this slide the key sections of the accessory and temporary use article that are either new or revised, and I'll be going through those in these following slides. We begin that accessory use article of the ordinance by describing some general rules for residential and non-residential accessory buildings. When it comes to residential accessory buildings, we believe we've endeavored and we believe we've successfully addressed a number of questions that arise from time to time and addressed a number of issues that have arisen with respect to the types of variance requests or special considerations that folks have asked for over the years. And so in that way, we think that establishing these new and revised provisions will make the ordinance more resident friendly and reduce the need for zoning relief requests going forward that have typically arisen over the years. One of the key changes is that today's ordinance, I think, says that a property owner in a residential zoning district can have a detached garage or the key accessory building, and can have one additional accessory building. And as a society, we've accumulated more stuff, and it's more common to have various types of features in the rear yards of property. We've made that a little more flexible and have proposed that replacing that fairly restrictive one detached garage and one additional accessory building, that going forward, as proposed, we would allow one detached garage plus two additional detached buildings. And in combination, that detached garage and the two additional detached buildings could not cover more than 1,250 square feet of the lot, with a maximum height, as I mentioned earlier, being revised from 15 feet to 18 feet. In addition to the detached garage and the two major additional possible accessory buildings, the ordinance will allow for the first time two small sheds with a very small sort of footprint on the ground, something you might buy at the home improvement store to store lawn equipment in, with a 12 square foot max each. So two additional small detached cabinets or storage sheds in the backyard, in addition to the one detached garage and two accessory buildings. They would be exempt from the building coverage limits, not counted as part of the one detached garage plus two additional building limitations. Non-residential accessory buildings, those will require special use approval, pretty much as it occurs today. The maximum height for a non-residential accessory building is 20 feet, and all of those would be subject to some minimal landscaping requirement along the foundation of the building to sort of soften their appearance within commercial zones. Okay, so one of the key new additions to the accessory use chapter is a proposed new allowance for what in the planning world are referred to as accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are often called a variety of things: in-law suites, backyard cottages, granny flats. They go by a number of names, but the sort of agreed upon term within the planning world is accessory dwelling units. And these are small secondary housing units allowed on a lot occupied by a single-family detached residence. They could be built from scratch, anew, as in a detached, one of those detached accessory buildings in the rear yard. They could be carved out from the interior of the existing principal dwelling unit, maybe has a separate entrance, separate kitchen, and the like. Could be a garage apartment, often take the form of garage apartment or carriage house kind of situation. They're subject to a number of regulations under this proposal. Again, they'd be allowed only on lots with a single detached principal dwelling unit, no more than one per lot, size limited to no more than 850 square feet, or the floor area of the principal dwelling unit, whichever is less. And when it comes to building additions or new buildings that accommodate ADUs, they'd be subject to some reasonable design standards to ensure that they're sympathetic or compatible with the overall character of the neighborhood and with the existing principal building on the lot. The idea of accessory dwelling units is they're kind of an invisible way to accommodate additional housing opportunities in the village. They do so in a way because of the size limits and because of the various controls on them. They help preserve the existing neighborhood character while providing additional housing options, which in it can help support people being able to remain in their homes as they have an accessory dwelling unit that either they move into or that they have somebody that helps care for the property moves into the smaller additional housing unit, the ADU, and by doing so, they can have some effect on housing affordability, diversity, neighborhood preservation, and the ability to age in place within neighborhoods that's so important in today's world. All right, number of other additions and changes that I'll bring your attention to in this accessory and temporary uses article, Article 7. Most of these have been added with the purpose of just adding clarity. I think that the village over time has learned to interpret and administer the ordinance in a way that accommodates the types of things I'm going to be talking about, but it just makes it easier for everyone if the ordinance has some predictable, objective language about, yes, that's allowed, and these are the terms under which it's allowed. The first one of those would be electrical vehicle charging equipment. Wouldn't be hard for staff to make an interpretation, even under today's existing ordinance, that, yeah, that's a customary thing in 2025 and beyond. We can allow that, but by adding it to the ordinance, it just clarifies that EV charging equipment is allowed within a parking lot for a retail business or whatever, and that those spaces that are reserved for EV charging can count towards satisfying the use's minimum parking requirements. Outdoor fireplaces, kitchens, fire pits, and the like, the kind of amenities that have become commonplace in residential neighborhoods in backyards. Again, the idea, let's make it clear that when these types of features are allowed as accessory features on a lot, and that they're closely aligned with the village's building and fire codes. Fleet vehicle storage, this is something that would pertain to accessory uses or to commercial and the commercial and employment zones, the manufacturing and business zones, making clear that the storage of a couple of light-duty vehicles is allowed as an accessory use in commercial and industrial zones, and that it be limited to 2 unless approved as a special use. There are requirements that they be located on the lot, that these storage areas for customary business vehicles on a lot, light-duty vehicles, would be sensitively situated and screened from view of streets by landscaping or fences and the like. Backup power generators, which have become another common feature within residential zones that provide backup power in the case of a storm or other emergency. Again, ordinance makes it clear, yes, those are allowed. Here's where they may be situated on the lot and what the requirements that apply to them are, including some mitigation of the sound-related impacts on nearby properties, and the view of that type of equipment from abutting lots or from neighboring streets. Alternative energy equipment, solar, wind, geothermal heat pumps in the rear yard. Again, common features and consistent with the village's objective of accommodating alternative energy equipment. Express allowance in the ordinance that allow these types of features. Donation drop boxes. Again, we're outside the residential districts and more of a commercial area type of accessory use, limited to just a few of the commercial and employment zones, B2, C1, M1, M, and the new public and institutional districts. Donation drop boxes would be allowed, permit required for them, and there are some reasonable regulations regarding the size and the policing of any debris around them and the like. A series of regulations addressing what we generally describe as outdoor accessory uses, and those include like outdoor display areas that accompany indoor commercial uses where merchandise available for sale or lease or whatever are displayed outside of the building during normal office hours. Those types of features would be expressly allowed. Storage areas, which are not necessarily for the display of merchandise for sale, but for more long-term storage of uses, limited to the industrial, the manufacturing zones, M1 and M districts. Special use approval required for those storage areas. Outdoor seating and dining areas. These are not outdoor seating and dining areas in the public right-of-way along the sidewalk, but on the property would be allowed for eating and drinking establishments. There are controls on setbacks from neighboring properties, fencing, and landscaping required to help mitigate their appearance from neighboring streets and off-site. And then other outdoor accessory uses would be accommodated through the special use approval process. And finally, the fence regulations, largely a carryover of the fence regulations that exist, with some adjustments to address common variance requests, setback requests from streets and the like. Again, with an eye towards a little more business and resident-friendly regulations, reducing the need for variances and interpretations over time. Article 8, not much to say. This is the article that deals with cell towers and antennas, wireless telecommunications equipment. By and large, this is simply a carryover of the existing regulations in the zoning ordinance. The only caveat to that is we have adds authorization for microcell networks to align better with regulations found in another part, Chapter 82 of the Village Code, small wireless facilities, often located in the right-of-way or in very small kind of devices. Article 9, parking provisions. This kind of starts this series of articles dealing with what I described earlier as the general development regulations. Highlighted changes here include some changes to the minimum parking requirements that apply to various uses. As a general rule, many of the existing commercial type parking regulations for retail uses, restaurants, offices, and the like are proposed to be reduced slightly. I think this will make for a more efficient use of land, ensure that the ordinance isn't over-requiring the amount of land area devoted to surface parking lots and paved surfaces on a lot, doesn't limit a property owner's ability to put in more than the minimum, but brings the minimum more in line with what we see in other villages in 2025. Additional reductions to those minimum requirements, as is true today, can be allowed or expressly authorized for downtown, which is largely exempt from off-street parking for existing buildings, at least. Multi-tenant centers established, that are already established, and uses that would be required to provide under the minimums of the ordinance 3 or fewer parking spaces generally get an exemption from the parking requirements in the ordinance. Those are largely carryovers of the existing ordinance. Also, with regard to parking, what's included in the parking chapter are new minimum stacking requirements for drive-through type facilities, restaurants, pharmacies, car washes, and the like, to ensure that there's some minimal accommodation of vehicles that are queued in line on site without sort of backing into the public right-of-way and disrupting traffic flows. The parking chapter includes parking lot design standards. These parking lot design standards generally are taken from the village's existing regulations, although the existing regulations they're sort of separately found within a series of specifications outside of the zoning ordinance. So we've tried to pull those regulations into the ordinance to make it a little easier for folks to understand sort of holistically what the parking design expectations of the village are. One change that is important to point out is that we've proposed an update to the minimum parking stall size, which under today's ordinance is a minimum 10 feet in width and 20 feet in depth. We've reduced that to 9 feet in width, 18 feet in depth, which again is sort of consistent with the practices we see in other villages that have had an opportunity to update their ordinances in the past, and will result in a more efficient layout of parking lots. As you can see here on this slide, we have a table indicating for various kinds of geometric layouts of parking lots, different angles of parking, and an illustration explaining how those work. The other changes in the parking chapter are clearly identified with underline and strike-through text, and they're mainly technical and clarifying in nature. Article 10, tree preservation and landscaping. This is again an instance where these regulations generally exist in the village of Westmont, but they're not codified as part of the zoning ordinance. So applicants, interested citizens who are interested in knowing what the landscape requirements are, aren't given a sort of one-stop place to find that information. We have to find it in other parts of the village code. So we've proposing the transfer of several provisions from current chapter 80 of the village code into this tree preservation and landscaping article. Some of the landscaping regulations are proposed for slight adjustment and clarification. Specifically, the amount of landscaping that's required for open areas on the site, a little more clarity to what is sometimes expressed as kind of a vague provision in the existing ordinance. And for the interior of parking lots, a requirement for more specific allocation of landscaping to in the interior of large parking lots. 20 space or larger parking lots would be required to have landscape islands periodically placed throughout the parking lot to help with stormwater impacts and the visual appearance of parking lots. And then the screening of parking lots from view of residential zones and from streets. The provisions in this article also include new provisions that allow for some flexibility. We refer to it as alternative compliance. And it basically allows staff and others who are reviewing the site plan to work with an applicant to say, we can't technically meet the exact specifications of the landscaping requirements of the code, but we can meet or exceed the objective of those landscaping with a little more flexible landscape design. So this is again an express authorization to do something that commonly occurs, but we don't really have a process or a specific authorization for it. So these alternative compliance provisions could come into play for some minor modifications to strict compliance with the landscaping requirements in Article 10. Sign regulations of Article 11, again in the general development regulations portion of the ordinance. Largely a carryover of the village's existing sign regulations, which were amended not long ago. The changes are merely edits to address known issues and questions that have arisen since the last update of the village's sign regulations. We've slightly expanded the list of expressly prohibited signs to include sort of garish flashing LED window border lights that are sometimes applied and aren't really consistent with the other provisions of the sign regulations. New flexible sign exceptions that will help to provide greater certainty and flexibility for merchants for things like grand opening signs, which I know has been common in recent years to have questions about how long we can have temporary signs when a new business opens or new activity occurs on a site. Rear wall signs are expressly allowed for businesses targeted in the downtown area, where parking is sometimes in the alleys behind buildings, and there might be a secondary entrance, and the need for an allowance that allows for some reasonable signage for those businesses, in addition to the signs that are customarily on the front of the building along the sidewalk side. The final article of the General Development Regulations, Article 12, includes carryover of a number of existing provisions. One thing that we haven't carried over are the existing, I think they're referred to as industrial performance standards. These are things that address the operating characteristics of heavy commercial and industrial uses like noise, odor, vibration, smoke, and the like. These are provisions that have been in zoning ordinances for a number of years. They are important considerations, but they sort of go beyond the ability to efficiently administer and enforce as part of the zoning process because they're so operational in nature and ephemeral. So we've proposed that those performance standards be migrated out of the zoning ordinance and into the village code where more robust administration and enforcement mechanisms can be in place to ensure them. New outdoor lighting regulations are proposed in Article 12. These regulations, reasonable, consistent with what we see in other villages, they would apply to new development. They're not retroactively applied to existing lighting. They're aimed at addressing nuisance or spillover lighting onto neighboring properties. Think a commercial property with a large parking lot, ensuring that the lighting for the parking lot is situated, designed, heights and so forth, so that it doesn't spill over onto neighboring properties to the rear or to the side. Updated intersection visibility provisions that address not only major street intersections to ensure that there's adequate sight clearance at intersections to see oncoming traffic coming from intersecting streets, but to address visibility at alley and driveway intersections as well. So we've added those provisions in the Article 12. The nonconformities chapter. Nonconformities, just to remind us all, are not situations that are illegal or violations of the ordinance. They are situations that were established. They were lawful at the time they were established, but because of changes in rules, may no longer comply with new regulations. We often refer to these types of things as being grandfathered in. These provisions are important provisions. They're not used on a daily basis, but they're important to address questions about the rights of property owners who did things lawfully and had, and changes over time have made that not permissible in the future. It retains the right to keep those legal non-conforming situations. The only changes in this chapter are editorial in nature, intended to clarify any language that is less than perfectly clear, and there wasn't, frankly, much of it in the existing zoning ordinance. Article 14, review and approval procedures. As the name suggests, this article consolidates all of the various approval processes that apply to zoning-related matters under the new zoning ordinance. Zoning changes, zoning text amendments like we're considering tonight, special use requests, planned unit development requests, zoning variances, a request for zoning relief. All of those procedures are presented in Article 14. summarized in tables, often including rudimentary flow charts that describe the various process and the steps along the approval process. As I mentioned before, there is a new procedure that applies to those planned unit developments that I mentioned as part of the special purpose districts chapter, the replacement for the existing PD, a new development plan procedure which kind of starts out the planned unit development process, leading to ultimate approval of a special use for a PUD, and then revised, streamlined site plan review procedure, which I'll describe here. First of all, the development plan. Again, this comes into play for planned unit development requests. It's required for new or amended PUDs. And as I said, that B3 district, if it were ever to be expanded, modified in any significant way, or applied to other properties in the village, the PUD process would apply. The development plan is also available as an option for any property owner who's requesting a rezoning in the future, who wants to sort of clearly indicate to surrounding residents, to boards, commissions, and review bodies what exactly will occur as part of the zoning map amendment request. It's optional as part of a standard zoning map amendment. It's required as part of a PUD type application. The process for approval of a development plan is a pre-application meeting with staff, pre-application presentation to boards and commissions, a general concept plan, and then the development plan, which contains the basic overall approval envelope for what's proposed as part of the PUD. Once that development plan and special use request is approved, individual site plans, if the project is phased or not, would be required to sort of round out that process. I mentioned in the opening slide to Article 14 that the site plan review process is proposed for a bit of streamlining. And the way we've done that is to propose really two types of processes. A major site plan, which would apply to projects that involve new buildings or additions to existing buildings that would constitute more than 10,000 square feet of gross floor area. Those would all be major site plans and would require review by the Planning and Zoning Commission, you all, and ultimate approval by the Board of Trustees. Minor site plans would be those that don't hit that 10,000 square foot tripwire. So any site plan that doesn't constitute the major site plan would be a minor site plan. The approval process would occur at the staff level. It's important to point out, however, that staff has the authority as part of the administrative site plan, minor site plan review process to essentially kick up projects that might be eligible for minor site plan approval, because there's been a lot of inquiries about it, or there's known issues in the neighborhood. They could essentially kick that minor site plan up to a major site plan, referring it to the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Trustees for other approval. And there might be other instances in the ordinance going forward, as you may be amended in future years, where individual use types are singled out for requiring major site plan review and approval. So bottom line is two types of site plan approval: major, which will require review as they do today, Planning and Zoning Commission, ultimate decision by Board of Trustees, and the minor ones that are less than 10,000 square feet or haven't risen to the level of a major site plan. Article 15, largely existing provisions, simply clarifies the roles of the zoning administrator within the village, and establishes, as today, a range of enforcement actions that can be taken to ensure voluntary compliance with the ordinance provisions. The last two articles, measurements and definitions, constitute that kind of glossary or reference material that helps clarify and explain the various technical provisions in the ordinance. The measurement provisions, as the name suggests, tells how we measure compliance with various things, like how do we measure building height in terms of, for purposes of interpreting whether a building complies with the ordinance. How do we measure building setbacks, lot coverage, outdoor open space, and the like. One additional point of flexibility that's incorporated in the measurements chapter is a new section that allows for setback averaging, front yard averaging for new development, where the existing building pattern on a block might be some houses built out to 15, 20 feet, others set back to 30. And that's sort of hypothetical, that allows for property owners to make use of a contextual provision which takes into account basically the mean or average of the abutting lots on both sides of the subject property, to ensure that if everybody else is built out to a certain point, that the subject lot isn't held to a higher standard and is, forced to be set back more than the predominant pattern on the block. Number of illustrations added in that chapter as well, or in that article as well, to help explain the measurement-related provisions. The final article of the ordinance includes defined terms. Again, start with the existing definition section of the ordinance, prune those definitions that are no longer necessary or terminology that's not used in the ordinance, and added new definitions for terms that are being introduced for the first time. And again, added illustrations in several instances to provide clarity for the words on the page, so to speak. The final part of the ordinance is an appendix to the zoning ordinance, and it includes a list of recommended trees and shrubs that could be used to satisfy the landscaping requirements that I described earlier. Although the lists are helpful and provide a really broad palette of plant types and trees and shrubs that can meet the ordinance, there's also a provision that allows for the zoning administrator, planning and zoning commission, and the like to, as part of the site plan review process, approve other species that are non-invasive in nature. So the purpose of having this list is, again, going back to that mantra of clarity and predictability, and also to ensure that there is a safeguard against use of invasive species. We want to ensure that those types of plant materials aren't used to meet minimum landscaping requirements. So that's what I have, and I'll look forward as we proceed this evening with answering any questions you have, and I guess turn it over to Scott. Are you next? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
You decide.
Staff.
Thank you, Commission. My name's Scott Williams. I'm a senior planner with the village. We also have Adam Walsh, our planner, and then our community development director, Joe Hennerfine, here as well to help with discussions and questions. First, just want to thank Kirk for providing the presentation. We've been working for a while on this. It's been a long time coming. So I appreciate everyone being here and residents alike to get input from them as well. As Kirk mentioned, we haven't comprehensively amended the zoning ordinance since 1979. Since then, there's been changes, amendments, and updates to the provisions in that ordinance throughout the years. This has led to the ordinance kind of being hodgepodge together and having conflicts within itself, with staff having to utilize the ordinance on a daily basis and talk with residents, developers, and interested parties it gets confusing. And a lot of times what happens is we take a question in where other villages like Downers Grove can provide them an answer directly when they come to the window or a phone call to the residents, from the residents to staff. We can't do that well here at the moment because we have to sift through their requests in our code and get input from other staff members, and then sometimes the village attorney has to get involved to make determinations. It's not really friendly to those developers and residents when they just want a clear answer of simple things like, where can my fence go? Where can I have a porch? Where can my generator go? So this update is to help make it a cleaner process for staff and residents alike. Kirk mentioned in 2013, we adopted the comprehensive plan. One of the major goals in that plan, and it's scattered throughout the comprehensive plan, was to update the village's zoning ordinance, as well as other sections in our code that we're not talking about today. Specifically, residents at that time and business owners at that time, over 10 years ago, decided it to be inflexible and outdated. Specifically, one of the implementation methods recommended was to update the zoning ordinance itself to better reflect the unique needs and aspirations of the village. So this is where the initiation process from staff and village board is coming from. And that's why we contracted Duncan Associates in spring of 2023 for their consulting services. During that time, we gathered community input through public listening sessions in summer of 2023. Kirk and his team did interviews with business owners, with staff, not just the zoning staff, but staff throughout the village, to gain insight of what comes into confusion for them. After the input and listening sessions, staff reviewed draft ordinances. We had public discussions here and at CDC, our Community Development Committee, regarding specific topics about to gather input from them in direction of where they want to go, to make sure we're not out of line for what the village wants and needs are. We also took some of the pros updates to the Downtown Business Alliance to gather their information, as we are proposing some large effects to their districts to gain insight on how we can better handle their needs as well. So today, the public hearing marks a key step in the final adoption process. We believe that the code, as it is right now, is about 90 to 95% of the way there for implementation. We hold off on presenting it until we get to 100% to the village board level. That's where the public hearing comes into play. So with tonight and probably following meetings after the fact, we're looking for input from residents and property owners here tonight and at the following meetings, and the commission to formulate the rest of the ordinance and fix anything that may be needed moving forward. So as we continue through this process, we'll have new language and proposed language at other meetings moving forward. So first, I want to provide a brief overview of what a zoning ordinance does and what it does not do. We have new commissioners here tonight. We also have residents in the audience and people online watching, so I want to make sure everybody knows what zoning ordinance entails. The zoning ordinance itself is a blueprint for how communities should develop and grow. Think of it as basically, we don't want factories where schools are. We don't want noisy uses in the middle of quiet residential neighborhoods. The zoning ordinance helps prevent those types of conflicts. In addition, it divides the land into different districts. These districts could be residential to commercial to industrial, manufacturing, or special purpose districts. Each district has its own set of rules and regulations. The zoning ordinance itself specifies also the bulk standards, or types of buildings and activities and uses that can happen on a property. So for example, in a residential district, it might allow single-family homes, but not large apartment buildings in other districts. Also, in other commercial districts, it might allow for stores and offices and the like, rather than having those in residential districts. As I stated before, it also sets the standards for development, so that's how tall your building can be, how much of your lot can be covered with impervious surfaces, how much parking is required, and as Kirk mentioned, what type of landscaping can be put on the property for commercial properties. The zoning ordinance itself is crucial for managing growth, protecting property values, ensuring the community develops in a way that's both functional and desirable for everyone involved, as well as people visiting the village. What the zoning ordinance does not take into account, as they're in separate municipal code sections, are things like building codes, fire codes, sprinkler requirements, stormwater detention requirements. They're not looked at in the zoning ordinance. They may have impacts on the zoning ordinance outside of that with developments and standards, the like. This commission is not looking at those type of codes here tonight, nor do we have any purview to look at them with our expertise here. So with that being said, in the case of Westmont, we're proposing pretty significant amendments to our zoning ordinance, as Kirk went through. I will likely be reiterating a lot of what Kirk already went through, but I'm going to try to provide some specific examples as we go through, and provide some background of why we made some decisions in the proposed text. The main goal of the amendments we're proposing tonight are to modernize our regulations, make it easier to understand, and to implement those goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan that was developed in 2013, which has been some ways away at this point, as we're getting around to it now. Like I said, we're open to fine-tuning things in the regulations from and comments from the commission and the public as we go through the whole process. The documents themselves, and this is mostly for the public, so they're aware of where documents can be obtained. The documents themselves are available on the village's website in our agenda center. The full text is available, staff reports are available, and the agenda itself are available online. We also have a landing page on the website under the planning and zoning division, where you can learn more information just on what the process has been so far. In addition to that, we also have a document that's in your packets that go through the discussions we've had at planning and zoning and at the CDCs to give some background. That is also available on the website. Getting into the actual ordinance, Kirk mentioned a few things regarding Article 1, the introductory provisions. We're not looking at rehashing the Article 1 provisions because most of it's carryover and just clarification of what's in the existing code. Some things I just want to point out is we're trying to provide some guidance for interpretation for definitions. That includes when a definition is not listed in the proposed zoning ordinance. We go to the Planner's Dictionary, and then if it's not defined there, we look at the Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary as well to provide guidance for residents when they have questions on what a use is or developers for what a use is. In Article 2, we get into the residential districts. Article 2 revises the regulations for residential districts. Those are your R1 through R6 housing or residential districts. The goal for those districts is to have diverse housing options throughout the village. It ranges from single-family, multifamily to senior housing in the R6 district. As Kurt mentioned already, we're including the minimum lot depth of 120 feet, which is currently located in Appendix B of our village municipal code, which is our land development code. We're pulling it into the zoning ordinance itself because we found that developers need that information up front when they're looking at proposals for subdivisions, and it's easier for them to have it in those bulk regulations rather than sifting through the rest of the municipal code. Related to that, we are proposing reducing minimum lot width for detached single-family homes in the R3, R4, and R5 zoning districts from 60 feet to 50 feet. I believe Adam put together a visual. Dennis, if you can put it on the screen, he's at his laptop. We'll see if it works. So the reason behind this change, Kirk mentioned a few reasons. Some other reasons are just to be more consistent with surrounding communities and what they allow for lots. We have a lot of properties that are undeveloped or not developed to the potential they could be because they have a very deep depth of a lot where they maybe have 100 feet in width, but they don't have a lot, they have a lot depth of over 300 feet sometimes. Where they only need a certain amount for their house and they don't have a need for the rest of their properties. So in those circumstances, we're able to provide the ability for them to subdivide. In addition to that, we're also reducing the minimum side setback for detached houses in the R3 zoning districts, just to better align with the 5-foot easements that we currently require on subdivisions in our land development code. And just to cohesively integrate into the reduced lot widths. Right now, the lot width requirement for the R3 district is 6 feet. So the reduction of 1 foot to match the 50-foot proposal provides them the opportunity to build a single-family home that is at the most 40 feet in width. Additionally, we're eliminating maximum floor area ratio, FAR, from residential properties to improve land use efficiency while maintaining some other mechanisms to reduce overdevelopment like lot coverage. We're also changing the method in which we calculate density. So right now we calculate density by a bedroom count, which is somewhat backwards from how most developers think regarding how many units they can get on a property based on the lot square footage. The current method is just is outdated. We only know of one other community in DuPage County that does it like that. So we're changing it to use a method at a dwelling unit per square footage, or dwelling unit per acre calculation rather than the bedroom count. The density numbers themselves are not changing. We're trying to be as in line as our current provisions. So the density numbers for multifamily, the R4 and R5, are what they are in the ballpark of what they were when we passed text amendment just in, I believe it was in January of this year and December of this year. So those aren't changes because we've already had some discussions related to that. Moving on to Article 3, the business and employment districts. Article 3 handles those districts labeled B2, C1, M, M1, OR, and OR1. We're moving them all together just to consolidate the information for everybody, for all those property owners and residents and the developers as well. In relation to that, you'll notice, as Kirk mentioned, we're removing the B1 limited district provisions from this article and moving them into their own downtown article. We're also eliminating supplemental setbacks, as a decent amount of the properties along these major corridors where the supplemental setbacks are, think Cass Avenue as one of the major ones. Many of the properties' existing developments don't meet the supplemental setbacks in a lot of the areas, especially in the downtown. The measurements are all different for those right now as well. And just to provide clarity, we're introducing or removing those and introducing just increased minimum setbacks for the B2 and C1 districts from 10 to 20 feet, as that's kind of the middle ground for those supplemental setbacks that are currently in our code. Again, we're eliminating maximum floor area ratio for business and employment districts to be more business-friendly and less restrictive towards future development of the commercial properties. We still have other regulations that can reduce overdevelopment, such as landscape requirements and open space requirements. Moving on to the downtown zoning districts. Article 4 provides just details regulations tailored to the village's distinctive downtown transition areas. So encompassing the B1A, or the downtown core, the B1, the downtown edge, and the R7 downtown residential districts. Many of the regulations Kirk introduced already just offer a more structured framework for establishing those new zoning districts, the downtown core and downtown residential. Much of what the comprehensive plan has in place regarding the downtown area includes enhancements to the downtown's compact, vibrant, and walkable character, while recognizing the adjacent single-family homes surrounding the downtown. Those substantial changes are largely being proposed to aid redevelopment and align with existing plans that we have, as I mentioned already, and to allow the village to be more competitive with surrounding communities as it relates to development and businesses moving in. As Kirk stated numerous times, the redistricting of these provisions are not of discussion tonight. Those rezonings themselves for individual property owners will follow just the normal rezoning process, likely following any approvals of the zoning ordinance. And it will be at separate meetings, and those property owners will be notified as is required by statutes. As Kirk mentioned, we're breaking down the permitted zoning or permitted building types into 4 categories, really. We have storefront building, general buildings, row buildings. So to put in perspective those type of buildings that we have currently in our downtown, one of them is a newer development at Quincy Station, which would be largely categorized as a storefront building. That's your 5-story buildings, which would be permitted in the downtown core, where we're focusing development, more intensive development near the train tracks and near the intermodal area in the downtown. The B1, which would be the downtown edge, would remain as it basically currently is in the regulations, which allows for 3 stories. The areas, the downtown edge versus downtown core, really vary at that main level is the how many stories it can be, and then also what those buildings are geared towards. If they're geared towards residential, if they're geared towards office, or if they're geared towards retail, which is generally what you want in your downtown core to have people come in and utilize it. Additionally, in the proposed R7 district, the redevelopment of row homes and general buildings are meant to accommodate a transition to those single-family areas in the downtown, or near the downtown. It still supports somewhat compact development and walkability to the adjacent train station, and we're perceiving it as the comprehensive plan perceives these 3 distinct areas along the railroad tracks. In addition to that, existing single-family homes on those properties will be able to continue and be utilized using their existing R5 regulations if those properties are rezoned to R7. That's so they can utilize their single-family homes as they have in the past, and not to hurt those property owner rights. New single-family homes that may be developed as tear-downs in the R7 district or on vacant lots would require a special use permit prior to construction, taking into account the surrounding area and development. As Kirk mentioned, one of the things we've heard a lot about the downtown provisions relate to the B1 development permit. One of the hurdles that staff hears most about is we have an extra step for businesses moving into the downtown in the B1, was currently the B1 district, in that they have to get approval from the village board ultimately to move a business into the village's downtown, which just takes further time and steps for businesses that are investing into the village to actually start operating. So our proposal is to remove the B1 development permit and just have all uses listed in a single use table as either as a special use or a permitted use. So there's clear indication that a use can be allowed in the downtown. Moving on to the special purpose zoning district, or zoning articles, which is Article 5. As Kirk mentioned, it governs the PI district, the public institutional district, the proposed new planned unit development, and accommodates the existing planned developments and the existing B3 or resort district. These districts and provisions are unique. That's why I'm in the special category. They're unique because they were provided for unique circumstances that don't fit neatly in our bulk standards or existing provisions. That's why they have their own section. The creation of the public institutional district allows greater flexibility for the unique needs of the institutional governmental uses that are difficult currently to allow in existing single-family homes in the R3 district largely, where we see parks scattered. We see parks scattered throughout single-family districts, and a lot of the needs they want, such as gazebos and the like, without principal buildings, are difficult for us to administer, and that's why special purpose or public and institutional zoning district is being proposed here. Some uses that may be allowed in those districts include safety services, those are your police station, firehouses, and the like, schools ranging from public schools to private schools, religious institutions, as well as governmental uses, think water towers and Village Hall itself. Again, with those changes, we're not tonight rezoning any properties, or if approved, any rezoning of the properties would happen after the fact. We'd come back in with those proper noticing and have the public hearings that are required. As Kirk already mentioned, the introduction of planned unit developments, PUDs, you'll notice on our current zoning map, we have PDs, planned developments. Somewhat of an older methodology for what we now use in most industry terms as PUDs. With the introduction of PUDs, a multi-step process I'll get into a little bit later, and Kirk already mentioned most of, allows for developments to request a special use permit to become a PUD, which allows them some more flexibility of how they want to develop their property. It's a more unique way of development. You usually see it when there's multiple buildings on a property. You usually see it when there's maybe, for example, a golf course on a property is when you see it a lot in other municipalities. Those regulations also provide the opportunity for waiver requests from the uses listed in our current table. It can range from uses that are permitted or allowed, or special uses, to uses that are not explicitly allowed in that table. Additionally, it allows for waivers for height of buildings, density, and other provisions that are normally instituted in our bulk standard regulations. All of those would have to go through an approval process, come through planning and zoning, the village board ultimately. The planned development overlay district is going to become a legacy district as proposed, just so we're not messing with any existing planned developments and those agreements that are in place now. The existing B3 district is being retained. We're having minimal changes to the B3 district. It is largely a single property in the village where the B3 district lies. Any substantial changes or proposals on that property would require an approval of a planned unit development as well. Moving on to the next article. This article specifically regulates and addresses principal uses on private property. It defines land usage within the specific zoning districts by listing allowable uses in a clear table. They're listed as either permitted or as special, indicating if a use is permitted, they can start operating basically without coming in for approvals. Special uses have to get a special use permit approval through planning and zoning and ultimately the village board before they can start operating. In those special uses, the reason we have special uses listed in the use table is to have greater control on uses that may have a significant impact on surrounding properties or might not fit on a particular property as well as a permitted use. The goal for the changes in this section is to maintain most of the existing permissions under the current zoning ordinance, just providing more discretion when determining uses at the village level, but also providing potential uses the ability to look at the use table on a single page rather than having to sift through 8 different tables. So we're able to hand that out to the public rather than having them call us and ask questions constantly. They have the ability to look at the table themselves and determine where that use lies and to verify that with us. With the use table, we're replacing a lot of outdated terms that have uses that are overly detailed. For example, one of the uses that we have in our current use table is haberdashery. That's a very specific term that we don't need specifically defined in this case. A term regarding enclosed retail services fits better and provides greater scope. Moving on to the accessory uses and temporary uses provisions. This section has most of the uses, accessory building allowances within it. I'm not going to go through a ton on this. This is where we get into a lot of questions or issues that come up when somebody submits a permit for a fence or a shed or a garage. We've looked at previous variance requests within the village and ones we've approved. So to start off, we have an example on the screen right now just related to accessory building allowances on residential properties for single-family residential properties, detached single-family residential properties. This includes, our current code only allows for 1 detached garage and 1 additional building on the property. Usually that's in the form of a shed. And those type of buildings are restricted on the building type themselves on size and height. We've heard from this commission and then also from residents frequently that we're not providing enough for them to utilize the property how they want to utilize the property. So instead, we are proposing the opportunity to have detached garage and 2 additional detached buildings at a maximum coverage of 1,250 square feet and at a maximum height of 18 feet, just to better serve those residents that need the extra storage space, but not allow for overdevelopment of a property. In addition to that, we're also having proposed exemptions for up to 2 small sheds on a property at 12 square feet or less that do not go into the calculation for the maximum building coverage, because usually those are prefab sheds. They usually don't have a base to them. They're usually leaned up against some other type of structure. Related non-residential properties and accessory buildings and uses, we are now specifically allowing them for non-residential properties through a special use approval process. Currently, our code's pretty silent on where and when they're allowed for commercial properties. We want to make sure, the reason for the special use process, we want to make sure that those buildings are being utilized for the primary use on the property, not for secondary uses on a property or another business moving in on a property. We want to make sure that they're meeting minimum design standards that we require for primary buildings as well. In those cases, we're allowing for additional height, up to 20 feet in height, and compliance with the foundational landscaping requirements. Getting into ADUs, which I believe we have an example of on the screen as well. So ADUs are a new topic for the village. They're called accessory dwelling units. We've had discussions at CDC and Planning and Zoning regarding ADUs and if we want to institute them or not. We decided to go through with proposing them here. They would only be allowed on occupied single-family detached properties. These accessory dwelling units are a newer concept in suburban areas largely. You see them a lot more in more urban areas or in cities themselves. They allow for smaller independent living spaces to be located on the same property. A lot of times we hear that people want to age in place and have the support from their family. They just don't have the room to do so. So this would provide an avenue for them to have a place to age in place. Additionally, we've seen properties use these for rental income, housing of extended family, and affordability for missing middle housing. With being a non-home rule community, we don't have the specific regulations to regulate renters and have inspections of those properties. So we don't have real legal ability to have a purview of who is actually in those and occupying the buildings. So we're not proposing any of those regulations in the zoning ordinance. Many of the issues that people have found with ADUs are related to noise and really nuisance regulations, which we do have nuisance code that can help in aiding those impacts. With ADUs, we're proposing that they cannot exceed 850 square feet, and they have to comply with design standards just to ensure that they can cohesively be in those single-family neighborhoods and not look like they're outliers within the neighborhood. As you can see on the example, we have, in this case, it's an attached ADU. ADUs can be attached, they can be detached, and they can also be in detached buildings as a secondary use. So if you have a garage and you have the space to have a second floor, you can have an ADU as proposed here. Same as a standalone building, as just an ADU itself, or attached to the building with separate entrances. Usually those are called mother-in-law suites in layman's terms.
Scott, can I interject real
Go
quick? So I just want to mention that, so you mentioned garages. This doesn't necessarily mean that everyone could go out and convert the top floor of their garage into an ADU. Most garages that exist now were not constructed so that they can have a dwelling unit in it. So if someone wanted to do that in their own garage that's existing now, it's not necessarily an easy thing. It would be something that has to be designed. You have to get utilities to it. You have to meet a lot of minimum requirements. So if anyone's thinking that there's going to be this rush to convert, the upstairs attic of a garage into an ADU, we don't foresee that happening. We do think that people can build new garages that can do that. So just because we heard both CDC and Planning and Zoning that said, well, no, we want this option there and we're making the use available, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be a piece of cake for everyone to build out an accessory dwelling unit either in their home or on their property. They still have a lot of typical construction restraints that they'd have to go through. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, in addition to that, as if proposed and approved as it's shown here, there will be a growing period where, we have to speak with Public Works and the building department and fire to make sure they're knowing that the regulations are being put in place and they have the ability to institute their regulations in those additional dwelling units. Or accessory dwelling units, sorry. Kirk mentioned other items regarding accessory uses. I'm going to fly through them real quick. We're introducing electrical vehicle charging equipment regulations because our code's currently silent on it. We're introducing clarifying language for outdoor fireplaces, kitchens, fire pits that just align better with our building regulations and fire code. Currently, our zoning ordinance does not take into account those distance requirements that are required in the building and fire codes. We're introducing allowances for fleet vehicles to allow light-duty vehicles for commercial and industrial districts at a maximum of 2 vehicles that are screened from the street to be allowed on these commercial properties. We're doing this in an effort to become more business-friendly for property or businesses that need fleet vehicles where we currently can't allow them. We get a lot of inquiries related to catering businesses or bakeries that cater on the weekends to big events, but they also have a brick and mortar shop just to accommodate those type of uses. In addition to that, we would require, if they want to exceed that, they'd have to the 2 vehicle limit for light duty vehicles, they'd have to come in for a special use to make sure their property can accommodate it. We will look at the parking regulations and make sure that their primary use still has the parking ability to be accommodated on the property in addition to those fleet vehicles. We're also introducing regulations that allow for what we call alternative or renewable energy sources. Those include solar, wind, geothermal devices. Those regulations are also required through the Clean Energy Jobs Act, through the state's requirements. And so we're implementing those into the code where we're currently silent on many of them. We're also adjusting fence regulations, and I know we have an example of that we can throw on the screen. So currently we have a fence requirement or fence maximum for 6-foot solid fences, which is usually the most requested privacy fence for residential properties that we see nowadays. Those are your usually PVC or vinyl white fences, or they can be solid wood fences. So in the example, it's showing where those the 6-foot solid fence is allowed, and it takes into account corner properties. As shown there, I believe it states 15 feet from the side property line, side yard adjoining a street property line. It has to be 15 feet from that property line, and it has to be behind the front setback. In the new code and what we're proposing is also shown here, we're relaxing that. We get a lot of variances right now related to corner properties. We've seen many approvals because a lot of the properties have, especially corner properties, their side yards are utilized as their backyards because of our restrictive side yard regulations for the building setbacks. And to allow them to utilize those yards, we're reducing that. I believe, and Adam, can you correct me if I'm wrong? What is the setback shown there?
For a side yard adjoining a street, it's down to 5 feet.
It's down to 5 feet, and then the setback from the front property line is from the buildings, where the building line is, rather than the required setback. We have many properties that are non-conforming, and the house itself sits further or closer to the street than a lot of other properties around them. And to allow them to have the same guarantees as those neighboring properties for fencing, we're proposing that they can move up to at least the building line and no farther. So those 2 examples give you some insight on why we're coming up with fence regulations, or new fence regulations for those. In addition to the fence regulations we currently have, we're just clarifying a lot of it. It's currently somewhat of a jumbled mess and hard to read. This provides some better language for contractors when they contact us. In addition to that, we have also requirements for corner vision triangles and on public streets and alleyways. So right now, they're only on public streets where the requirements come into play. We also are requiring corner vision triangles. Basically, a corner vision triangle is where you can't build something because of line of sight issues for pedestrians and motorists when they're coming out of alleyways or public turns. Right now, it's only for public streets and not alleyways. We are proposing a reduced vision triangle just so we don't have line of sight issues for people coming out of the alleyway. We're also clarifying regulations related to swimming pools and hot tubs just to align with building code regulations. We're granting allowances for generators to encroach into certain setbacks. As those are more popular and popular nowadays, we get more and more permits regarding generators, and this just clarifies the language, or the lack of language in our current code. Kirk mentioned we're introducing regulations for donation boxes, donation drop boxes. We get a lot of inquiries on donation drop boxes for commercial properties. We're not allowing them for residential properties. We also have some clarifying regulations for vending machines, which our current code is pretty silent on. At the end of the section, we have inclusion of regulations to explicitly allow some outdoor uses, including outdoor display areas, outdoor storage areas, outdoor seating, and outdoor dining, as well as an allowance for somebody to come in and ask for other outdoor uses that may not be explicitly shown in the code. They would have to get a special use for those other outdoor uses, so we can gather the impacts on the surrounding area and traffic issues and the like. The example I give is art exhibits are an other outdoor accessory use that's not delineated in this code right now. Related to that, right now we also don't have any regulations regarding outdoor seating and dining areas. We have no design standards. We don't really have an explicit allowance for them delineated in code. It is a perceived allowance for restaurants and the like to have an outdoor patio. Now we have explicit regulations that allow that, so there's no question that it can or cannot be allowed. With that, we have design regulations regarding fencing and just foundational landscaping surrounding those. We also have an allowance for outdoor display areas for outdoor retail-esque uses, just to clarify those regulations. We also have regulations regarding outdoor storage areas. We currently only allow outdoor storage areas in the M1 district, the limited manufacturing district, which is largely along the tracks in the downtown. We're opening up the allowance for outdoor storage areas in the M and M1 district, provided they come in for the special use to know what they're using that outdoor storage area for. And those also will have design regulations such as fencing and planting requirements and screening. Moving on, I'm not going to touch on wireless telecommunication facilities. Those aren't really changing. We're just including microcell networks. If you don't know what a microcell network is, it's basically Wi-Fi for large institutions. We're updating in the next article regarding parking. We're updating regulations for parking. Generally, parking in suburban areas is essential because most suburbs are based on the underlying street patterns in a village. The goal with the parking regulations is to ensure that accessibility for the uses and the parking related to those uses, safety, convenience for residents and patrons and visitors. while minimizing just potential negative impacts like congestion or aesthetics concerns in the surrounding area. The updated parking count numbers we went through pretty extensively with Kirk to try to come back in line with neighboring communities and their parking regulations. Like many of our code regulations, it hasn't been updated in some time for parking. We have more faith in developers who know their parking needs than the village knowing the parking needs for them. They usually provide parking studies to us and their minimum amounts. They have other operating facilities usually in the area, and they know their parking counts better than we do for the most part. So we do have minimum standards for parking that are intertwined in the code right now. The reduction in a lot of those parking regulations also allow for the ability to create outlots where parking is currently taken up and not utilized. So the example I usually go with is if you look at a newer development like 63rd and Cass, you can see a lot of outlots and along, you have Amazon Fresh, you have Mariano's, you have LA Fitness, but you also have outlots like Freddy's and Raising Cane's that allow for those additional commercial activities to take place. And a lot of those times, those outlots are drive-through oriented, and they're in and out places. On the flip side, an older development is near the Jewel and Micro Center, where we have a lot of parking, but not a lot of uses are happening there. This would allow for outlots to be put into those parking lots if they can fit them, and provide better development along those major corridors. Moving on to some changes to residential parking. We are ratcheting down the multi-unit residential properties and their parking requirements. We found that we ask for too much parking nowadays, especially for properties that are located near the train station, and have other intermodal things that they can take advantage of, like shared vehicles on site or the ride share features. We're just ratcheting it down to be more in line with surrounding communities and what we've seen on previous developments in the area. We have, as Kirk mentioned, introduced additional reductions allowed based on the environmental context of the area. Those are your downtown areas where we're not requiring current properties to have parking or current buildings to have parking. Multi-tenant centers also have similar provisions for existing multi-tenant centers and other minimal impact uses. We are also integrating the parking lot design standards from the engineering code directly into the zoning ordinance, where people are actually looking at the code when they're developing parking lots, so it's all in one place. We are also reducing, in line with those changes of moving those parking standards into the code, we're reducing the parking stall size from 10 by 20 to 9 by 18, as we've seen that is the industry standard nowadays. Now, that doesn't mean Costco can't come in and provide those extra large spaces like they normally do. It's just our minimum is 9 by 18 at this point. We're also introducing stacking requirements for drive-through establishments. Drive-throughs are the bread and butter for a lot of larger corporations nowadays. We don't have any regulations in the books right now for drive-throughs and how many cars should be stacked in one place, double drive-throughs. So this is just providing regulations for those drive-through uses, or drive-in uses as our code calls it currently.
Scott, I'm going
Go
to
ahead.
interject for 1 second, too. Ironically, we do have stacking requirements for bank drive-throughs.
True.
And if anyone has paid attention recently, there's virtually no one in a bank drive-through nowadays. In fact, most of the banks are taking their drive-throughs away. So when Scott says we're trying to modernize the code, that is how antiquated our code is we regulate bank drive-throughs, but we don't regulate a McDonald's drive-through to say how many cars should be able to queue in the drive-through without blocking the parking. So that is one of the kind of user-friendly type things that you're seeing. So sorry.
Nope.
Sorry, Scott.
In addition to that, we are also allowing for developers to come in with their own numbers from a licensed professional to, if our regulations don't allow for certain things, they can provide the information to us that says, no, look, this is what we need, and we can go with those regulations instead when they go through site plan approval. So it allows just for flexibility for the commercial properties. Moving on, we also are including minimum landscaping island requirements and into the design aspects for parking lots. Some code that exists right now that was recently updated includes the tree preservation and landscaping requirements in the village. That's currently in the municipal code. We are moving those regulations into the zoning ordinance where we have site and landscape plan approval processes, so it's in the zoning ordinance for those developers to see. Related to that, currently, I think it's Article 4 of Chapter 80, those municipal code sections. Those codes were just reaffirmed at a previous village board meeting. We're now looking at changing a lot of those regulations other than the landscaping itself. So the tree stuff is staying the same of what the current code relies on. Some of the updated landscaping regulations require portions of a proposed development's open space to be landscaped. It's a little clearer in the code than our current municipal code regulations. We're updating parking lot landscape requirements, including landscape islands, as I mentioned before, for spaces or for larger parking areas that include 20+ spaces. We're including visual screening from residential properties for those commercial parking lots. And we're requiring enhanced street-facing landscaping for almost all properties, or all commercial properties. We also have the ability at the zoning administrative level to authorize alternative compliance, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission does as well in certain cases. In all cases, those plant species must be non-invasive. Moving on to signs. We're not really touching a lot of the sign regulations as it relates to numbers. We went through a pretty extensive process in the last decade related to signs. That we had multiple meetings here, is my understanding, regarding signs themselves. So it's pretty fleshed out in the current code. We're just moving it over and making sure it's readable for general context. We get a lot of sign permits. Planners don't love dealing with signs. Sign contractors like to make the biggest sign possible, so we're just clarifying the regulations for those sign requirements. In addition to that, we're also expanding the list of prohibited signs to include LED window borders, as they generally have a negative impact just on the aesthetic of the area and pose safety risks for motorists and pedestrians. We're updating how measurements are taken. Currently, our code requires that all signs are rectangles or viewed as rectangles, and you draw a big rectangle around the sign, regardless of where the open space is in that sign. So the sign could be a circle, we would draw a box around it to determine the sign. The sign could have very large lettering and then some small non-specific lettering, and you would still have to draw a whole box around the whole thing. That includes awnings as well right now. So right now we have to look, when we look at awnings, we have to take into account the entire awning rather than the individual signage components. So we're just providing a little more clarity on how we're measuring those signs, and those are shown in infographics in the code. We're allowing sign exceptions and allowances for grand openings, as we mentioned. We want to make sure that the businesses feel welcomed in the village and they have an opportunity to succeed, so that's why we're implementing those. We also are allowing sign allowances for the rear of those downtown buildings, as Kirk mentioned. We just recently had all those alleyways redone, and we have now parking that's on the rear of these properties. So we've gotten questions on, well, if I have opening in the rear to allow these patrons and can I put a sign there so they know where to go and not have to walk around the block to get to the front door to know which building it is. Currently, our code doesn't allow it, and we think that's a reasonable request for the downtown businesses to make. Moving on to general development regulations, we are providing regulations for outdoor lighting. Right now, I believe we have 2 sentences in our code related to outdoor lighting for commercial properties that basically state it shouldn't impact residential properties, and it has to be 0-foot candles at the lot line, regardless of where it is on the property. It's very difficult for somebody to do a study for lighting, a photometric study, when you have properties that are on major thoroughfares with major street lighting. So we're taking into account those regulations, but we're also requiring that regulations that address downcast lighting. We don't have any regulations that require it right now. We want to require downcast lighting to help with environmental factors, bird migration, light spillage to neighboring properties, those type of things. We're also providing, related to the photometric plans, alternative compliance methods. So when somebody's replacing a light fixture, they don't have to get us full photometrics as long as they're meeting some of the other code requirements, such as the downcasting and shielding. I already mentioned we're updating the visibility triangles for public streets and alleyways that are in this code section. Moving on to nonconformities. Most of this code was adopted pretty recently, so we're not making major changes. We're just trying to provide clarity for users where we run into non-conforming issues throughout the village. For a village that's pretty well developed, there's going to be non-conformities throughout it. Some newer code that's being proposed within the non-conforming section is non-conforming development features. You can think of those development features as basically, the major example is undersized parking lots, where we don't want to hold them, especially properties in the downtown, we don't want to hold them to the strict requirements of the parking regulations, because it would be impossible for them to actually do. And we've seen a perpetuation of these gravel lots in the downtown, rather than improvements on those gravel lots to provide some additional parking in lines. So it's to provide those type of instances where they can still improve something that's non-conforming, but they don't have to meet the strict standards of our current code because it's not practical for them. It reduces the amount of variance requests for a single parking lot in the downtown. That would just further deter property owners from actually coming in and getting things done to improve their property. Moving on to some bigger changes in the next article, review and approval procedures. Many of the review and approval procedures aren't changing, but we have 2 major changes and some minor administrative changes just because they're not utilized any longer. So first, I'm going to talk on some of the things that we're removing from the zoning ordinance. Those are zoning certificates, and certificates of occupancy are being removed directly from the zoning ordinance as they're accomplished elsewhere in the municipal code, and it's a redundant section. And then we are also introducing new development features. Kirk went through some of these. I just want to highlight a few of them. So we have what are called development plans, largely with PUD or planned unit development approvals. These development plans basically provide the property owner with a property owner and the village with a general plan for the type, scale, and physical characteristics of a proposed development. The plans themselves will identify uses generally on a property. So if there's a large PUD, you would say, and it has multiple uses on it, you'd say this area is going to be utilized for multifamily residential units. This side is going to be used for single-family units. This side is going to be used for a golf course. This side is going to be used for a clubhouse. It would delineate generally where those uses are taking place and provide some guidelines. After they get approval of those development plans, they would move into site plan approval, which is more specific to those uses areas. So if you have a multifamily residential development intertwined with the rest PUD, you would have to provide the site plan for that specific multifamily residential development, including parking, density, and the like, building height, and where everything will be, just like a normal site and landscape plans. A lot of the PUD regulations are clarity focused because our planned development language in the current code is not as clear as we would like it, especially when dealing with people who want to utilize the PUD standards. As Kirk mentioned previously, development plans are required for the PUDs and B3 zoning districts as it relates to PUDs specifically. Those plans are ultimately come through planning and zoning, then ultimately approved by the village board themselves. Site plans, though, can be done in two categories. We have major and administrative site plans. Kirk already mentioned the major site plans have to reach a certain level to be moved into the major category. Those are 10,000 square foot additions or new buildings, 10,000 square foot new buildings. Those would come through the normal process that we've already seen, which is a site plan approval and landscape plan approval process, planning and zoning, and then approved by the village board ultimately. Staff has also the ability to, if a property or a potential development might have a greater impact on the area or on neighboring properties, we have the ability to move any site and landscape plan to the major category to provide clarity to residents and the staff, and the commission and the village board themselves to make those decisions. Other site plans, labeled as administrative site plans, generally can be approved at the staff level directly without going through public meetings. We've had a few in recent memory that have basically gone through this whole process of site plan and landscape plan approval. They get the final approval of the village board, and they didn't have any variances or special needs that needed to be looked at. They were meeting the code standards. They didn't have any real issues on the property. It was kind of a rubber stamp, yes. We're making you go through this process just to make you go through that process, which is all in good for the commission level and the village board level to know what they're doing. But for the developers, that turns what would normally be a 1 month process into a 2 to 4 month process to get permits. So it's just cumbersome when you have new properties or new developments coming in. That are meeting all the standards we want them to meet, and we still say you still have to get through the planning and zoning process, even though you're meeting everything. So in those cases, we would be able to allow staff to make the decision that you're meeting the regulations. You can now basically submit for permits. You don't have to go through this whole public meeting process. Now, if property needs a variance or a special use, they would still have to go through the normal process because there's impacts we're looking at. Those developments basically allow the property owners and the developers to start the permit process without being structured in a way that inconvenes them directly. Additionally, site plan amendments can be done administratively to a certain degree. Those are labeled as minor and major amendments. A lot of times we get properties that didn't show a fence on a site plan, and they wanted to put in a fence. And my current code says any new or new structures on a property have to go through site plan approval. Historically, in the past, we have the policy has been to allow some structures to not go through that process if they're little to no impact. But this puts it on the books, so we have something to base it off of. Other major amendments to site plan approvals would just have to go through this normal site plan approval process and be reviewed by planning and zoning, the village board ultimately. Moving into administration and enforcements. this is largely just clarifying who the zoning administrator is and who what the process is if you're in non-compliance for zoning-related activities. Most of it's already done through a lot of the adjudication process that the village has set up. Moving a little faster, measurements, we're providing infographics and detailed measurement methods, so we can provide the information to developers, contractors, and residents. We're clarifying a lot of the definitions that are in place and adding a lot of definitions that we think are needed. Some include revisiting the structures versus buildings, what's a structure, what's a building, as well as just instituting definitions for new terms in the code. That's everything that we're updating as far as key changes. There's a lot more clarification that is shown in the code, and I encourage you to go through it. I know you've had it for a while already. I encourage residents to go through it and people who want to speak. There's a lot of clarification in the code that I'm not touching on in the staff report. A lot of grammatical changes and things like that. But the key changes we want everyone to be aware of are in the staff report. And I encourage questions and comments from the commissioners and the public, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Let's now open this up to public comment. I'm sure there's a few folks out here who would like to address the commission. Who would like to go first? No, please come to the podium and speak into the microphone.
Yeah, so first thing, I enjoyed this meeting because it's very nice. And I came here, one reason
Your
that...
name, sir, and
Oh, sorry,
address?
yes.
Thank you.
My name is Tapan Biswas, and my address is 6464 Richmond Avenue. That is Westmont right now. But actually, my mailing address is Willowbrook, but I'm in Westmont Village. So I came here, one of the reasons, because I live a place which my lot is like 165 by 144. And this lot actually, initially I have a plan to live with the whole family. So basically, my children is there, they like to live, and I also like to live. So initially I was planned, can I make like a two separate residential single family home? And that is, at this moment, is not possible. So I talked to Scott before, what can I do? And I also talked to one couple of times. So the detached ADU, I think that is the proposal actually I'm supporting. It is very useful. And particularly, the two reasons. One is that because of the family, like me, I'm almost like close to retirement. My children, they can live side by side. And we can meet frequently without driving. So it is a family bonding, and frequent meeting each other will be very helpful if I have two family lives side by side. So that's why detached ADU is very important. I supporting that proposal. It will be very helpful for me. And also other things that, as I say, my lot is relatively big lot. And in the world, population is growing. Land is not growing. Actually, we are losing. So if we use smartly our land without disturbing that, like a neighborhood, it will be financially also very useful. So I feel like it is a good proposal, and I support this, and hopefully I can use that, that amendment in the future. So that's the only things I'm
Right, sir.
telling you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next?
My name is Tim McCahill. I am a commercial property owner in Westmont. We own several properties on 63rd and also in Black Hawk Park. I'm calling today, I'm coming here, we've owned properties in Westmont since 2015. Up until about a week ago, this is the first I'm hearing about this. We've not been made aware, not been given any notices. It's unfortunate that, I'm hearing business owners were consulted. I've talked to probably 4 or 5 different owners in my park not one of them were aware of any of this going on. It significantly impacts, the value of our properties. So, that's like the first thing. I get it. There's a lot going on. I'm not a resident, so I don't get notices, but as a business owner, I would have thought some notices would have went out that this was happening. We talked about like the mantra of clarity, like understanding. It sounds like the village has dealt with a lot of people that haven't had clarity in some of the issues. And what I think you're doing to the M district specifically is the opposite. We have a sale going on one of our properties. It was just terminated. The buyer said, anytime every use is a special use, because we have a 4-acre lot that's fully paved, has been there before the residence is next door to it, been there since, AT&T's been our tenant since 1973. And the way the zoning code is going now, or what they're proposing to do, is honestly it's harming us, not helping us. Every use that we want is a special use, so that when, there's no clarity to any of these people that come and want to use our property. So every time we have a new tenant with this new proposed zoning, we would be at risk that we're just turned down. Our use is typically hard to find. Outdoor storage related properties, people don't want them. They don't want school buses. They don't want trucks. They don't want equipment rental facilities. But unfortunately, everything in this room is delivered by a truck. Everything in this building is built by a contractor who needs outdoor storage. They need booms. They need stuff as you have a growing town. All that is needed, it's necessary. So if you have it, do it the right way. Put up a 6-foot fence if there's 6-foot, stuff being stored. We're just asking for something to be fair for us. And the way we look at this zoning code, it honestly just completely diminishes the value. It's actually the opposite of what I heard the gentleman speaking about today. It provides no clarity. It just creates more questions. And I think the zoning code should be updated. I'm fully in support of it. It sounds like the majority of the stuff I thought was great. But for our property in the M district, that specific district, I feel is harmed by what they're proposing today. So that's just what I want the town to consider. And we'll go through the process and put our property in the thing. But I just wanted you guys to at least hear that from me.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm David Meek. I'm actually the zoning attorney for Mr. McCahill and his company, Transport Properties. I just wanted to add a couple of things, and I appreciate it. I've had a chance to talk with Scott a couple of times, and he's been helpful for us to understand what the thrust of this is. And but we do have some concerns, and we'll bring those concerns with more specificity to staff. But I just want to give you sort of a color of it. For us, in particular, there's two areas of concern. One is with respect to outdoor storage as a special use. And I can understand, I appreciate that it was prohibited outright. And so there was some, it was actually prohibited. Now you're at least allowing it through a special use. I'd ask that you consider maybe making it permitted, but subject to certain very specific site development standards, which if they're not met, maybe go through a special use, because it would provide people who have some degree of outdoor storage with some certainty that they can understand what they're going to be able to get without having to go through a multi-month process to re-tenant a commercial space. I can appreciate the need to have some level of review, but I think a lot of codes are written with very specific site development standards with respect to setbacks, screening, et cetera. If maybe some of those were considered instead of the special use, or two different types of outdoor storage, one which might require special use. I think, again, we'll bring something forward to staff. With respect to Tim's other concern about truck parking and storage had been a permitted use. I know we've had a conversation with Mr. Hennerfeld about this, and we're having a difference of opinion about interpretation of it, but we had understood that some amount of truck parking was allowed. What we see now in this code is fleet storage, but it's very, very limited, and so of limited applicability. And again, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit. I'll go through the staff, but I just want to lay this out. If you've got a business that has more than 2 vehicles, which might include trucks, well, if you have two vehicles that are basically passenger, small vehicle size, that's allowed, but anything else is a special use. Again, that's pretty onerous. And if you've got fleet vehicles, which are trucks for your property, that's outright prohibited. Well, how does that help a lot of businesses which have trucks as a part of their business component? If they have a fleet of 3 or 4 or even 2 trucks that aren't small, they're outright prohibited as we read this code. So we'd like to make some suggestions that would allow for some, it wouldn't be such an imposition on businesses and prospective tenants, whether it's our specific property or others. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Schuring. I live at 5719 Buck Court here in Westmont. And I think the proposed zoning ordinance is very close to meeting Westmont's needs as they are at this time. I just had 3 suggestions that I wanted to bring before the board. My first and biggest suggestion is also my smallest because it entails one single change to one single word. Minimum parking requirements to minimum parking recommendations. The new ordinance's parking section would work well as a guideline, I think, and most developers and businesses will likely defer to it. Making them suggestions rather than restrictions, however, would give our town the flexibility it needs to grow the way it needs to. I realize in light of the lower parking requirements that this may be a little more than we're comfortable with this time, but I would encourage you to keep it in the back of your mind as a potential future amendment, especially if the lower parking minimums yield the benefits we're hoping to in terms of land efficiency and walkability and all the other things that make our town so vibrant and nice to live in. My second one, I would like to just suggest, if it hasn't been considered yet, for ADUs, some sort of express permitting process that would allow the ADUs to just get started off to a strong start. How I picture it working is you would go to Westmont's website, you can maybe enter your lot ID number, and it would return a limited menu of ADU designs that work for your property, ones that already meet code and zoning requirements. If you agree to one of those out-of-the-box designs, you could get a permit same day without the need of a public hearing or anything else. I think just because Westmont uses so many similar housing setups and so many similar sized lots, you go to the northwest side, you see a lot of long, narrow yards. You go to the southwest side, you see a lot of alley houses. We could use that uniformity to our advantage if we make just a couple, I think, pre-approved designs that would work for a large number of homeowners here in the village. Finally, I urge the commission to match the minimum lot size to each zone's new minimum lot width and depth. In an R3 zone, for example, where I live, the minimum width is 50 feet and the minimum depth would be 125 feet. Now, if you multiply those together, that equals a total size of 6,250 square feet. But currently, the zoning ordinance lists it still the minimum lot size as 7,800 square feet. I live in a 4-bedroom home. It has a front yard, it has a backyard, and it comes in at about 7,500 square feet. If one can comfortably build a 4-bedroom home below the minimum, I feel that minimum may be set too high. We don't want to inadvertently make it illegal to build starter homes or empty nester homes. A sensible minimum wouldn't change the dimensions of any of the existing lots, and the free market, of course, will ultimately determine the size of new lots and future lots, but it would allow us creativity and flexibility, and if infill is the name of the game, we will need plenty of both in the years ahead. Thank you for letting me speak, thank you for listening, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Bonnie Waymondad, and I live at Robinson Lane, which is on the south side here. So I will try to keep my comments small here, although I have a lot in my head. My first biggest issue is with the 50-foot wide is very narrow. My previous community, they were all 50-foot wide. It was like living on top of each other. And if we're now going to add extra outbuildings, we're even more on top of each other. So I do have concerns about that. Also, I would note that your lovely pictures did not show 50-foot wide lots. They were bigger, much bigger. So I would really like to see your proposals on what you're actually stating. The other issue with that is that many families now are actually smaller in size. The birth rate has gone down across the country. Our population has gotten older, and there is a lot of articles about how people do not like McMansion neighborhoods. So by trying to accommodate the builders, no offense to any builders, who's going to buy the house? And our rates are already high for taxes in this community. And I've heard a lot about our neighboring communities. I would really like to see those stats, as much as how many of those were really on 50-foot wide lots, and how long were those 50-foot wide lots. When I look at my neighboring communities, I think of Downers Grove, Hinsdale, Darien, Clarendon Hills, Oak Brook. Any of those that are on 50-foot wide lots are really long lots. So they do have a large fenced-in privacy lot because it's on a much longer lot. And frankly, even my 50-foot wide lot in my previous community was 187 feet long, so I had the room to do what I wanted to do, and they still later tore it down and put up a McMansion after I moved out, which is looking like it's squashing all the homes around it. And we've even had neighborhoods here where when the family has moved out, they have said, I want my home to become a park. I don't want a builder to buy it, because we have a lot of builders, and no offense to builders, but we have a lot of empty lots and a lot of small homes that need to be redone and built up and made nice, whereas if we put them on 50-foot wide lots, then I know what happens. Before, when I used to come to meetings, it was, well, I need a special permit because I can't make money on this lot unless I divide it, yada, yada, yada. So I would really caution you on these 50-foot wide lots. Maybe use what this man suggested and give us an idea what you're looking at. If you're looking at putting out buildings on a 50-foot wide lot, which with a big McMansion. Many people have left the community because of the high taxes and because they don't want to live in a McMansion, ticky-tacky neighborhood. They want a decent lot and they want to afford to pay someone to take care of the lot for them. So they move out into another more rural area because they can't pay the taxes and pay someone to maintain their lot for them. So that's most of what I want to say about the 50-foot lot, because I know I have limited time here. The other thing I was going to talk about was a little bit of what this man here was speaking about. I would love to hear what builders are wanting to do with Westmont here, because what I see is a lot of redundancy. We put a grocery store next to a grocery store. We put a tire store across from a tire store, a car wash across from a car wash. Meanwhile, the banks stay empty. No one buys the property. We had the whole fiasco with 63rd and Cass, where everyone was excited there was going to be a movie theater, and then that didn't work out. Why? I don't know specifically. I heard rumor it had to do with the alcohol tax. I don't know. But nonetheless, we're getting a lot of empty buildings that aren't getting built up, that aren't getting filled, and we're getting duplicates of everything. So something is not still being communicated, and I didn't see that addressed in this. The only other comment then, on a separate note, is slightly, and you may have addressed this already by saying a 20-foot setback, but when they did this building here, and by here I mean at Cass and Quincy, or the east side is atrocious and nobody likes it, because there's no pretty garden that you talked about, sir. There's no pretty glass windows. It's a very unwelcoming, cramped area that's eating up everything around it like a monster. So no one likes that. So I think you may have addressed that with the 20-foot, and that would make me happier. So I caution you also, when you do start building up some of these land areas on Cass and elsewhere, please keep some of these thoughts in mind. And please don't just grant everything to a builder, because most of those builders do not live here. We do.
All right.
Thank you.
you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Daniel. I've been practicing in the land use and zoning field since '94, from Cincinnati, Indianapolis, DuPage County. My practice currently extends from Chicago out to Quincy, down to Champaign, up to the Wisconsin state line. Actually, Libman Broom Company was a client of mine just a few years ago in Arcola. I've handled projects up to $1 billion in value, downtown redevelopments, TIF. I've handled a lot in Westmont, acres and acres of land in Westmont. John is an excellent attorney. Staff knows and has good intentions, I believe.
Mark, can I interrupt? Are you here representing a client, a business or resident in
I'm here
Westmont?
because I like Westmont. I'm here every day.
So you're not here
I represent
for,
active clients against Westmont. I have a case in the appellate court. I've sued you once in the circuit court on another one. I have other ones developing that are problematic because of the delays. So I'm not going to identify the clients. I'm here on my own behalf.
okay.
All right?
The reason I asked was, I don't need to care the names of your clients, but if you're here on your own behalf, then you get, per the rules, you get 5 minutes, and then just so we can get to everyone once.
Oh,
and
I
then you
understand.
have a
I
chance
plan to ask for another
come
5
back
minutes
up.
at the end
Got
and
it.
figure out when you're going to come back. That's why I waited for other people to speak first.
Got it, thanks.
To follow up on what Mr. Meeks said, a special use is something that you approve because it has impacts in the neighborhood that you want to evaluate. And you want to make sure those impacts are not extraordinary compared to that use at other locations in the zoning district. A special use is not intended so that you can figure out what is being stored in an outdoor storage area. That was the statement from staff. We make them special uses in the M and M1 because we want to know what they're storing. You have a fire code for that. You have fire inspections for that. You have building, now I think you have building licensing for that. You don't need a special use to find something out. If you want, consider allowing outdoor storage throughout the M and M1 district without increasing setbacks. Increase the fence screen if you need to. Allow a 7 or 8 foot fence. But the issue for you is that you are so limited in M and M1 area in Westmont. It's not available generally. And it's not it certainly isn't available efficiently today, and under this ordinance it will not be available. I have clients who are contractors in Westmont, and if you think about the history of Westmont, contractors have always been a part of this town. You can go back to the '79 ordinance. You can look at Mayor Majeski when he was you just run through the history of Westmont. Contractors have always been part of the fabric of this village. And there have always been exceptions written for contractors in a lot of respects. 1979, section, I think it's 4.01, says that any special use as of October 1st of 1979 is hereby legislatively authorized as a special use if it is operating on the date of adoption of this ordinance. I don't see that here.
Would you repeat that?
As of October 1st of '79, under the prior ordinance, uses that were identified as special uses in that ordinance that were operating on that day were automatically identified as special uses that could continue. They didn't have to come in through the process. They were already in town, already operating. So contractors apply. A lot of the M1 uses with outdoor storage should be able to come in, get a permit, and not have to go through the special use process. I can't tell you. It's probably been at least 40 people that I've recommended look at sites in Westmont for commercial, for multi-story residential, and they all turn away because there's too much uncertainty in the code. This will improve things. I don't agree that you're 95% of the way there. And I'm not going to focus on substance as much as I am form in how you go about doing this now. Think about definitions. Okay, I want each of you to put yourself in the mind of somebody who's opening a restaurant. That slide, even in the residential district, they showed that they were making it easier to have fences and use their corner side yard or street side yard. Well, that makes sense, but did you notice at the top of the slide, for the poor person behind that individual lot that was shown, there's a home set back behind that fence, which, at the top of the slide, that fence was 6 feet tall. That's the kind of attention you pay. Put yourself in the position of the people that own the land, people that are trying to open the restaurants, the outdoor seating, for example, in the restaurant. Sure, you make it easier until you look in the landscape regulations that say you have to have not only foundation landscaping around the principal building, a 6-foot strip, but those regulations now apply to the outdoor dining area. On top of that, the outdoor dining area has to be fenced. That is probably the most improvident way to go about approving outdoor dining. A fence around an outdoor dining area, constant ADA issues. Constant ADA issues, service issues. Are people going to serve from over the fence? Is there going to be one entrance that's congested that becomes uncomfortable, that all of a sudden the outdoor dining area serves no purpose? Use a stripe outdoors. Walk through Elmhurst downtown sometime. Walk through Downers Grove. You'll see that they have stripes demarking areas for outdoor dining in the public way. Lombards sometimes will do that on private property. So just put yourself in the position of, hey, this is what I would like to do. I've got this $500,000 I want to invest in a space in Westmont. I want to have outdoor dining. I want to have decorative landscaping. Oh, and by the way, sometimes I'd like to have uplighting to highlight all this special landscaping that I have around my entrance or around my outdoor dining area. But I can't do it because the code lighting restriction now is that all the lighting has to face down. In Lombard on Roosevelt Road, I had a project, Creekview. It's right next to Pep Boys. You'll see it's under construction today. 4 years late. Over the course of time that we had to go through zoning to get variances and other relief, including a relief from the downlighting requirement for our landscape features, interest rates went up from 3.5 or 3.7 to 7.5. That project was never built. It was a fantastic restaurant that was supposed to go in, 3 stories, mostly glass building, outdoor activities, culture activities coming in. But because of the process, there was a problem. Before I go tonight, and I'm probably not going to be able to step up again, you cannot use the APA dictionary. I've raised it with staff. They've indicated that they're going to insist on using the American Planning Association dictionary. If I can go to a dictionary and see 7 definitions for amusement, or 7 definitions for contractors retail, or 7 definitions for something else in the code, any of which could apply to define the term you're using in your code, it's unconstitutionally vague. It's not proper. By show of hands, how many of you have the APA dictionary at home? How many of you have it online? Do you know what you have to do to get access to it online? You have to be involved with the APA. I've got a lot. I'm not going to burden you. I've offered staff the opportunity to sit with me, to sit with John. I have notes on page after page of this code, given years of experience. I heard that you were going to solve a lot of problems. The signs don't contemplate window signs, window digital signs for your downtown businesses. They can't have freestanding, but your electronic message boards are written for freestanding only, and you don't consider window signs for the realtors downtown, for the restaurants, or for gas stations. Those things are part of the folder I gave Doug Pollock years ago before he left, with my 15 years of notes about Westmont problems and why I lost clients who wanted to redevelop Bales, bring in a new hardware use with a garden center and outdoor dining area, apartments. So they're here somewhere. But I'll step up again. I'm going to deliver my hand-notated code. I'll probably scan it and email it, but I would encourage you to post an online collection of everything that you receive, either from me, from other business owners, from Mr. Meek. It's really important, this rewrite, because you are impacting a lot of businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Oh, I don't have that much to say. I'm Pam Van Spankeren. I live on North Grant Street. First, I want to thank that you're finally deciding to re-update the codes in this village. We've been trying for years to get a 3-car garage. We have a big lot. We could probably put the 3-car garage and another little house on it. And for years, we have gone through, oh, no, you're going to have a 2-car garage. That's all you can have. Then we went on, let's see, then I checked yearly to see if we can get this garage. Last year, I called, and they had said that, yeah, you can have the 3-car garage, you know, detached, and you got all the property. There'd be no problem, okay? So we started the procedure last year, but due to medical and other things that were going on, we couldn't do it. This year I figured, well, I better call again to see if this is still on. And they said, yes, you can have that 3-car garage. Then we got a denial for building this garage. But you did tell us that this meeting was coming and, you know, things were probably going to change. And it probably will be, you know, approved, which I'll be grateful for, because we can't get either cars in this garage because it's too short. You know, it's only 6 foot tall. And the vans and everything, they're a little bit taller than that. So I'm hoping that everything kind of proceeds and that we get a good code for business and residential. Okay?
All right, well, thank you very much. You got that, staff? Next. Good evening.
Jeremy Staniels, 10 North Roslyn. Just a couple small suggestions. In office and research zoning, now you have data center as an approved use. Totally get it. It's a growing asset class. No opposition there, but maybe we put some guidelines against it, since the office and research areas do abut residential. Not everywhere. In a couple of areas it does touch.
Yeah, please address the commission, sir.
Oh, yeah. So,
Thank you.
you know, data center asset class specifically has a lot of different power requirements, backup generation, large storage of lithium, things like that. So if you give yourself a tool within the permitted use to at least review how those things are being handled when you're abutting a residential property, right? You know, there's a small section of the zoning map on Cass, north of the library, north of the police department, that falls into that office research. I don't think the land's large enough to even house a data center, but that's an example, right? Over near Pasquinelli, there are areas of that zoning district that do abut residential. And, you know, to the attorney's point, you use that special use designation to give yourself the ability to assess what impact that's going to have on the surroundings. So just a small one. Another small one is, I think it's Article 4. You start mentioning approved facade materials, and that's fine. I think you need to make sure that when you are giving approved facade materials that you keep it open-ended enough, because materials change all the time. And, you know, we go through it a lot where materials change over the course, even of the course of a building cycle. But I would keep that open-ended, but I also think it'd be good to have some sort of tool in the code that allows Westmont to require third-party testing, right? And I'm not here to call out any builders or any subcontractors, but we have multiple buildings in town that are new or newer. They have a lot of efflorescence on their masonry facades, right? Downers Grove has the same situation. It's something that can be avoided with proper install during construction, right? And a little bit of third-party review for like facade installations may go far, right? There's an entire, there's classes now for building envelope enclosures and how waterproofing details are handled and how air and water barriers are handled. And I think enacting some guidance or some requirements that is a tool the village can use when these facades are being installed helps both the developers of the buildings and the community in general. Just a couple small comments there.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else?
Step up again just for,
Come on up.
I'm not sure what your next step is.
You got 4 minutes.
So, as far as the code's concerned, it is very important you pay attention to detail. There's a picture of the rear of my house on page Roman numeral 4-24, and it says, "My shutters aren't allowed." I have a house in Oak Brook that has been going through design review guidelines for the historic Growy Mill Gateway. The shutters that you show on figure 4-17 would not allow something that has been recommended favorably in the Growy Mill Historic District in Oak Brook. The reason why the shutters in that photograph are elevated compared to the side shutter is because there's a canopy over the front porch. But sometimes it's architectural. Sometimes it's that a window's a bathroom window, or a window that allows skylight down a stairway, or a feature of the house. One of the things that I'm raising that photograph for is the problem you face is when there's uncertainty in how the code's going to be applied. It destroys my ability to tell clients where to look for land, to work with architects and civil engineers. It makes it impossible. All right. You're going to a broad category-based use list, yet no one has talked about what you're doing with contractors. Not once during this hearing has anyone mentioned the backbone of the village of Westmont. Contractors. What's happening to the contractors? They're going into building services. All the folks in the B2 that are contractors, the ones in the B1 that are contractors, need to find a spot down south. And there's no space. I pay someone $65 just to come look at my hot tub because they don't have space to locate in our community in Elmhurst. That's how Westmont is approaching its code. We don't want it here, so let's all pay a little bit more to get our services, to get our trees trimmed, our trees removed, to get our air conditioning serviced. Let's all pay that mileage. It has a net impact when you don't have spaces for these folks. I would ask that you really focus on each section of the code. Hotel, motel, are those terms defined? Does it include extended stay? If you don't include extended stay, are you missing an opportunity to get the paired Staybridge franchisees under the Holiday Inn logo, the flag? You're missing that opportunity. Do you have an administrative variation process? Hotels are not at 100% occupancy every night, yet you're requiring 100% of the parking. Can you allow down to 75%, like a lot of communities will, on staff's review of a traffic study. Okay, can you have that flexibility to have, instead of an appeal from an adverse staff decision, I haven't taken one in Westmont. You know what happens? Because of the appeal process, I have to come to you. That's legal notice, that's a 30-day delay, that's the hearing process, 45 days delayed, and you've lost at least 24 new businesses because of that. And I disagree with staff a lot. Scott knows, John knows. I disagree with how you treat contractors. The fleet parking is unbelievable. Storage and parking are different. Whether it's in the B2, the B1, the M, storage and parking are fundamentally different. If I place a vehicle on a lot overnight so it's there on call if I need it, it's not being stored. It's parking. Yet I had a client who's gotten fined $100,000. Pay attention to your process. Last February or March, the village board amended the ordinance, it was a year ago, I believe, to eliminate non-conforming use rights in accessory structures. 12.0, I think it's 02 G2, G1, those two sections eliminated vested non-conforming use rights for at least a dozen people, including my client, who ended up getting fined because you recommended and the village board approved the elimination of my client's defense, which was lawful non-conforming accessory use. Think about any storage yard, any contractor's storage yard. That accessory use should be able to continue, yet it's gone from your ordinance. That kind of lack of attention to detail costs the village, gives me heart palpitations, causes me to litigate, causes me to spend hours reading this, even though I don't have a horse in the race. I do care about Westmont. A lot of people think I fight too much. But the reason I fight is because when I see a packaging store coming soon on Cass, I see underutilization of land. That packaging store should be in the B2 outside of your central business district. You shouldn't have gaps. I like that you're getting to the Build 2 regulations, but you shouldn't have these gaps between these buildings on Cass, and you should encourage people to take steps to eliminate them. Give builders some kind of an incentive where you want to have the change. But you also have to give them clarity. Try to define half-story in your ordinance. The definition says see section 16.10. That section doesn't apply to calculating height, so you go to 16.13, and you see diagrams that don't tell me what a half-story is. It leaves it open to staff interpretation, uncertainty for a builder. Look at Hinsdale's code. Hinsdale's code defines it by what percentage of that top floor is of a certain height. All right, there's a case, Edens versus Johansson, that John can read about it. It was at our old law firm at one point in time. But I do want to thank you. I'm here to help, really. I think this is probably the most important step that you can take, because I know a lot of development has gone north, south, or west. And I do want to see the change that you guys envision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been very interesting. All right, sir. Come on back.
So according to the detached ADU, Scott mentioned, I think the maximum is the 850 square feet unit. But if the lot is much bigger, where according to the normal situation, it could be built like a 2,000 maybe, or 2,000, hypothetical, 2,500 square feet easily can be built. So 850 is the just maximum that according to the lot size, they cannot make it bigger. So basically, he said the detached one is the 850 is the maximum.
Correct.
But a lesser lot is smaller lot, they don't have. But the bigger lot, they can they make it bigger than the 850?
All right, thank you for
So
that.
that's the question I have. So,
Staff has that, and appreciate it. I would suggest that we call it now that we'll say public testimony is complete, and we'll have a motion for continuance, date certain, 7th of May.
I think May 28th,
You're right. Yep.
unless we want to go
Okay, so
through.
we've gotten past public comment, yeah. 28 May, 6 PM would be, I would entertain a motion for continuance. Go.
Before we do that, you said you think public hearings, public comments done.
Yes.
So, because I don't know if everyone here had a chance to speak or if there's,
All right.
so either keep it open longer and see if anyone else wants to speak, or allow people to come back and speak by continuing the public hearing, because I think the public hearing's being continued so that the commissioners can ask questions and the consultant can provide testimony under oath, so technically the public hearing will remain open. And I just want clarification as to if someone in the public wants to speak at the next meeting, will they be allowed
As
to do
opposed
so?
to continuing tonight.
Can I add one thing? May 7th was the correct date, sorry.
Yeah, May
Yeah,
28th.
in which case, it would be the 7th of May for this continuation.
No.
Because the,
Oh, it is May 7th?
It'd be May 7th to get through the rest of the public.
because if the
And then
public testimony is
get
not complete.
feedback from the commissioners.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Can I make a comment about?
Please come to the podium.
Yeah, sorry. With respect to Mr. Zemanek's question about continued public comment.
Yeah.
I think as a matter of due process, I understand that a public hearing often has the section for public comment, but where public hearing is continued over 2 nights, and there could be further deliberation, further input presented or provided by staff or by outside, I think it would only be fair to make sure that you reserve some time for public comment at the next hearing. So that's just my little pitch for that.
Understood and appreciated.
I'm in a wedding in Florida, so you don't get to hear from me.
So Chair would entertain a motion to continue this hearing to the 7th of May, 6 PM.
Chairman, just for point
Yes,
of clarification, we would still be able to entertain public comment
That
at
is
that
correct.
time. So we're not
Yes.
closing it today.
We're not closing
Okay, in that
public comment.
instance, in that instance, I'd make that motion, Chairman.
Okay, I have motion.
Second.
Second, Thomas. Motion, Simpson. Second, Thomas. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Peterson votes yes. Commissioner Sharp?
Yes.
Commissioner Donahue?
Yes.
Commissioner Simpson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lynn? Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Chairperson Carmichael?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for coming and participating, everyone.
It's a quick meeting today.
Our next agenda item is open forum. Is there anyone here who would like to address this commission on any issue that was not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, move on to miscellaneous. The only thing I have is our next special meeting will be the 7th of May at 6 PM. And next month, we will still have a regular PZC meeting on Wednesday, the 14th at 6 PM. Does anyone else have anything else they would like to?
I'm just going to mention, for the regular May meeting on May 14th, we will have 3 cases likely on that meeting. And then, obviously, we have the continuation of this meeting on May 7th. Please let staff know if you're not available for those meetings. We want to make sure we still have a quorum for those meetings.
What are the 2 dates?
May 7th and May 14th. Second thing I just want to mention is everybody in their email should have got a link to and a request from our admin regarding training, an online webinar training through APA for new commissioners. I highly recommend that you partake in that. There is a I believe it's $25 sign-up fee. Please let staff, likely Jamie, our admin, know if you're going to partake in that, and we can likely cover the cost.
Yeah, and, I would highly recommend this.
That's all I have.
I've gone in for a number of years. Greg Pill and I used to go every year, and then Matt Scales and I, and this is an online
Correct, yeah. Webinar.
meeting, but, yeah.
Can I just touch on that training since we have several new people here? So American Planning Association puts on these trainings. And then American Planning Association, Illinois usually typically has an annual conference. And it usually is 2 years local, then 1 year downstate. The one that's happening, and it's usually in the fall, usually like September, I believe is downtown?
Yeah, this year's, I believe, at the old post office.
Oh, the old post office. And we typically always, there is a whole one-day planning commissioner training. And the village will pay for that if we have any planning commissioners that want to go to that. Now, I've got people like my chair who likes to go every year and hears the same thing every year. So there I will typically offer, like if there's a specific training topic, such as ADUs, and you want to go to that, I'll try to work with the commissioners to get them some of that specialized training if they want to learn more that way. But for all my new folks that want to get oriented to the ins and outs of how to run an effective meeting, how to do variances and special use approvals, we always recommend that. This year it's going to be local. When that time comes, we usually send you an email and say, this is the date, who wants to go, so that you can have that training. So the one that is online coming up soon is a version of that for those folks that can't do the more localized training, so. Sorry to
Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Thomas.
Motion. Sharp, second, Thomas. All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned.